Some soldiers appear saying that an undead is invading the city, and they instruct everyone to hide inside their homes. Because of this, some people become frightened and hide inside their houses. According to a legend, when the undead appeared in the world, disaster and death spread everywhere, and many died trying to fight against the evil. But this particular undead does not want to do cruel things like bringing disasters and death. In fact, he wants to become a paladin because he wishes to use the sacred light. Besides being an undead from the underworld with big dreams, he also wants to ride the wildest horse and wear armor with honor, just like the others who keep their oath and fear neither life nor death. The undead also wants to fight for the honor of those he serves, until death do them part. However, his feline friend says that he is a warlock and therefore cannot become a paladin, so his friend does not want to be dragged into this madness. But the undead tells his friend that he will help him with his goal, or else he will turn him into an undead as well. The cat realizes he has no other choice but to help, so he says he will guide his friend on the path of a true paladin. An evil undead seeking light and justice has promised to become the most sacred paladin of all, and he needs a spokesperson for his faith. Our story begins in the year 11,266 of the 4th era of the Elven calendar, at the southern tip of the Celtic continent in the Kingdom of Isaac. An unjust war is taking place, and Princess Irene Berbera Becker leads her army against the humans, but she does not have the advantage. The human king says that in the name of the Kingdom of Isaac, he will forgive Irene if she renounces her right to inherit the throne of the Becker house. The princess thinks that the darkness of breaking oaths, the corruption of faith, and the greed of the heart have become an eternal shadow over the entire world, and she tells the king that his word means nothing to her. The king simply says that he will not break his oath in front of tens of thousands of people. With that, the princess thinks of a strategy and orders the rest of her army to lower their weapons. They hesitate because they believe they can still fight and do not trust the humans. However, Irene says that the outcome of the battle has already been decided and there is no need for unnecessary sacrifices, and she also says that they are there fulfilling their commitment. But from now on, she releases them from their obligations to her family and orders everyone to lower their weapons. Seeing that their own leader has given up, there is no other choice but to surrender as well. The princess thanks everyone for keeping her entertained until now, but says that the next battle is hers alone, and that despite all the darkness, some choose to defend their honor. Then Irene says that this is her homeland, and she cannot retreat now. No matter what happens, she wants to defend the honor of her family, claiming that she will fight until her last breath of life. The king calls her a foolish girl, but says that if that's how it is, so be it. Then he tells his soldiers to prepare to attack. In the midst of this, someone appears shouting humility, and the king asks who said that. The mysterious person continues, shouting integrity and compassion. He also mentions valor and justice, and finally says the word sacrifice. The princess recognizes him as Gray, and she sees that there are still those who challenge the law to keep their vows, for glory and conviction. The enemies recognize the knight as the legendary Gray, the one capable of defeating men with a single blow, but they believe they can win because they are greater in number. Gray, for his part, raises his sword, and says that he has sworn loyalty to Irene Berbera and the Becker, and that all who stand against them will be his enemies. Then he says he will fight for their honor until his death. After that, he orders his Silver Moon Knights to advance, and states that this is what a true paladin really is. Before that, to the south of the Celtic continent, in the once idle and peaceful port of Hamlet, a supernatural monster shattered the peace of the surroundings. The soldiers walk through the city in search of the undead, and warn the people along the way. Fear begins to take over the city, and people run into their houses, because the fame of the undead is terrible among humans. The soldiers decide to split up to search for the undead, and each group heads in a different direction. Not far away, the undead wonders what is wrong with these people, but a cat asks what he is doing wandering the streets since he is dead. The undead is the protagonist of this story, and upon hearing the cat speak, he gets startled, because he had never heard a cat speak before. So the protagonist tells the cat to shut up, because he doesn't want the soldiers to find him, since horrible people like that would surely hurt him. In turn, the cat says that the undead shouted first, that's why he shouted too. But the protagonist says that anyone who met a talking cat would scream, so that's why he got scared. However, he says that something doesn't feel right, because this cat doesn't seem like a normal cat. Soon he deduces that actually, a ghost must have possessed a cat, and that would explain everything. But the cat tells him not to be impressed by just anything, because many animals in this world are possessed by ghosts. Besides, the cat says that a walking skeleton is a pretty rare thing, and asks if this is his first time on the surface. The skeleton asks how the cat knows that. With that, the cat says he can spot a newbie undead from afar, and asks why the skeleton is on the surface instead of staying underground in the abyss, and even risking getting pulverized. The protagonist says it's a long story, and claims that the ghost must know that the abyss is a very dangerous place, and to survive there, you need good skills. He was fragile when he was born and thought that pretending to be a steady skeleton for a great lich was a good idea, so he could learn magic. That worked for a while, until one day the sorcerer said that there was a big gathering auctioning off an incredible magical tool, but he couldn't go himself. So he decided to turn the skeleton into a soldier and send him instead. And while he was rushing through the tasks, the skeleton accidentally dropped the experimental device, and the Great Lich became quite furious. Afraid, the protagonist decided to run away and took the opportunity to steal some treasures first. The cat is astonished upon hearing this story. Then he says that the sun is about to set and he has to leave now, so he tells the skeleton to pretend this meeting never happened. After that, the cat calls himself stupid for being so curious and says he doesn't want to associate with someone targeted by a lich. However, the skeleton doesn't let the cat leave. So the cat says he doesn't want to die like him, and that one way or another, the skeleton will be pulverized, so he must stay away from him as much as possible. The protagonist says he knows the Great Lich's intentions, but asks why the humans also want to hunt him down. With that, the cat says it's not hard to understand, since an undead has a terrible reputation among humans, because they are synonymous with calamity and death, so they will do anything to wipe out any undead that appears. However, the protagonist says that the ghost in the cat is also an undead, and asks why he isn't being hunted. The ghost simply says that they are not the same, because he possessed a being that matches good manners and elegance. Besides being well regarded among humans, they even fulfill his wishes, like offering food and affection. Therefore, the ghost doesn't think it's an exaggeration to say that he is the master of the human race. The skeleton doesn't understand anything and asks what it means to be a perfect creature, and why making a different expression automatically makes a human his servant. He also asks why rolling on the ground automatically turns him into the master of humans. The cat simply walks away, saying it's not good to talk to strangers. But the skeleton doesn't let him escape, and says that someone is coming from the city, so they need to hide. From afar, the princess approaches on horseback. One of the soldiers says that this is the port of Hamlet. Irene says that this city feels a bit strange because all the houses are closed. Some soldiers come to receive the princess and say that they are the port guards and are looking for an infiltrated undead, and they apologize in advance for any trouble caused by it. The princess gets startled, but one of her men says that they have business to take care of and they can't waste time. Irene says she admires the soldiers' courage, but says she must pass through now, so she and her soldiers move forward while the guards remain at the border. One of the guards asks who those foreigners are. Their leader tells him not to ask questions that are none of his business and states that the port of Hamlet is about to change, but for now, they need to find the undead. Seeing all this, the skeleton asks why they were so respectful to those guys full of metal. The cat says that they are knights, the corporation of justice and light, the protectors of the city and its people. So whenever a knight appears, people naturally respect them. The skeleton understands, and now the cat says that he should return to the underworld and stay out of the lich's sight, but states that the surface is no place for the undead. However, the protagonist says he will never return to the underworld because there he is not respected. He says his name is Gray and swears that one day he will become a respectable knight too. But the cat says that he is just a skeleton apprentice of the lich who is afraid of humans, so he cannot be a knight, and he doesn't want to be dragged into this madness. The protagonist moves a little away from the port and carries the cat with him against his will. And along the way, Gray picks up some equipment from a blacksmith's shop, claiming that with this, he will be able to become a knight. The cat says that even if he steals a full suit of armor, it won't make him a genuine knight. With that, the skeleton says he had already thought ahead and stole something else. A book titled The Knight's Guide to Success, from the bookstore next to the blacksmith. He believes that by following it, he will become a knight easily. The cat even tries to take the book from him, but the protagonist says it is an important treasure. Then the cat asks him to put him down. He also says he doesn't know where the skeleton got all that confidence from. However, he states that trusting that book will not make him a knight. The protagonist asks if the 8 virtues described in the book are not true. This irritates the cat a lot because he realizes the skeleton is very naive. And he says that first of all, he would need a horse to become a knight, and there is no horse in the world that a skeleton could ride. But the protagonist clings to this idea of a horse, and begins casting a spell. He starts to awaken from the depths a mount that suits his needs. The cat gets super scared by this and calls him a lunatic. Soon after, from the depths, a mount made of bones emerges. The creature asks who dares to awaken the great Tanitos. Gray tells the creature to speak more quietly, or it will attract too much attention. He also says that Tanitos is an undead now, and if someone sees him, there could be trouble. Tanitos wonders how he became an undead, but the protagonist tells him to shut up, because the army is nearby, and they could get caught. Meanwhile, at Count Casper's castle, the Lord of Hamlet Port, Princess Irene appears to see him. Caspar calls her his adorable niece and says it has been a few years since they last met. She confirms and thanks the Count for agreeing to receive her. The Count thanks her kindness and says that his stupid son is very lucky to have her as his wife. Irene seems not to know what he is talking about. Then the Count says that perhaps he forgot to mention it before since he is getting old. However, he says that the main reason for receiving her at his castle is to formalize the marriage agreement between her and his son. Irene says that might not be possible, but she wants to talk about the Count's help for her to inherit the Becker family's title. Caspar says that even if the Grand Dukes will name her as heir, it would be a problem since she has a brother. However, Irene says that her father's illegitimate son is not her brother, so he is no more deserving of the inheritance than she is. Soon, the Count says that the king declared the son as the heir, so what remains for Irene to do is to keep her mother's property and renounce the Becker name to marry his son. This is a treaty that the Count claims to have made with the king, so Irene cannot go back on it. Irene says that the Count is finally showing his true face, but reminds him that he swore to remain loyal to her after the king's death. Caspar says that his loyalty belongs to the Grand Duke Becker. Besides, she did not inherit her father's title. The princess gets tired of this conversation, saying that they can make a new agreement according to ancient customs. Outside, the guards continue searching for the undead. Meanwhile, the protagonist hides among the shadows and realizes that it is becoming harder and harder to stay hidden. The cat says that at this rate he is going to die and begs the skeleton to let him go. Gray asks if the cat is not going to help him become a knight. After that, the cat says he never promised that and claims he is just a helpless cat. Even if he wanted to, he couldn't help. However, the protagonist completely ignores him and says he even has a set of armor for the horse. He says that the cat claimed it's impossible for an undead to become a knight, but argues that there's nothing about that in the book he stole. But the cat calls him an imbecile and says that a knight is a servant of the light, so being born of darkness could not become a knight. Gray says he doesn't worry about that after all. He knows the holy light, so he must also be part of the light, and the cat tries to convince him in every possible way. However, by this point, even Tanitos is supporting the protagonist, claiming that both of them will shine in history together, and he wants to run toward the sun again someday. With this, the cat gets tired of arguing and not being heard, and he considers simply finding another body to possess. The protagonist suggests turning him into a skeleton, so he would never feel tired again. Since an undead feels nothing, not even fatigue, the cat quickly changes his attitude. After all, that's not what he wants. So with this forced motivation, he says he will help the protagonist become a knight. Gray says that the offer to turn him into an undead remains open, but the cat refuses, claiming he is comfortable the way he is. The guards continue searching the city for the undead, but since it's already night, they are tired of searching, until suddenly, they see someone approaching. The protagonist and his mount walk along covered in armor. The cat tells him not to look sideways and just keep walking forward, until one of the guards approaches him. They say the city is under curfew and tell him to find an inn to rest. After that, the cat says it worked, as they passed unnoticed. Gray gets super happy and says he's a genius for hiding under armor. Even Tanitos was covered and also went unnoticed. The protagonist says that now he wants to find a master to make him a knight, but the cat says he won't find a master in the middle of the night. Gray asks why not. Irritated, the cat says that all normal people sleep at night, so if he wants to find someone, he should do it during the day. With that, the protagonist asks what he should do now because it's his first time as a knight and he feels a little lost. Then the cat suggests going to a tavern where humans usually go to get drunk. Back to the princess, a guard says that she has a duel tomorrow, and now she needs to rest. Irene asks if they think her decision was too impulsive. The soldier says that's not the issue, and says he can't understand why she agreed to such difficult terms. The princess says that Caspar would only agree under those conditions, but the soldier says that they shouldn't agree with that guy, and since the count has few men, he claims they are enough to defeat him. She says that from the moment the king tried to illegally take the Becker family's territory, there weren't many options left, and that's why they need the support of Caspar's troops. The soldier says that the count set up a turn-based battle between his knights and the princess's knights, and whoever lasts until the end will be the winner. Since they have about 20 knights, he claims there's no way to win by numbers, but the princess says there is a group of renowned mercenaries near the port. Then she says to hire them, because if they apply good tactics and use their advantage to attack the enemy's weak points, there will be a chance to win. Back to the protagonist, he arrives at the tavern. The cat tells him to go in and ask for a glass of wine and a fish. Gray asks why the fish. In response, the cat says he's hungry and needs to be fed to keep helping him. So Gray agrees and enters the tavern. The waitress greets him and asks if he is alone. The protagonist says he has a cat, so they are too. She finds him funny and leads him to a table. Around him, some bandits notice that a new face has appeared in the tavern and think about offering a spot in their gang to this knight. But the leader says that not just anyone joins the Red Scorpions unless they prove their worth. Sitting at his table, Gray is happy that the waitress called him a knight, but the cat says that was just courtesy, and anyone in armor is called that. And he asks if the protagonist has any money. Gray asks if he's talking about those metal objects humans are always picking up, and says he took some of those from the Lich's treasure room. The cat asks why he only took 1 coin. Gray doesn't know much about it. However, the cat says it will do for today, but knows they will have difficulties from now on. The protagonist tells him not to be pessimistic and says they can get money just like those humans at the next table. At the table, the bandits are gambling and betting. They see that the protagonist sat down at the table and has been winning everything since he arrived. Gray has no idea where he is or what he is doing, but he has the cat to help him. The cat says he is drawing too much attention and should lose a few bets on purpose. However, the protagonist doesn't want to lose since he's winning all of them. His opponents are biting with rage, calling him lucky, until one of the opponents decides to raise the bet to 10 coins. The cat tells the protagonist not to do it because it could cause trouble, but against all advice, Gray agrees to the bet. With that, the cat gets super irritated, claiming they're going to end up dead. After a while, Gray leaves the tavern with a pile of money and says that the cat was worrying for nothing and that he learned a lot in the underworld. However, the cat says that in the human world, winning all the time is not a good thing. Soon after, the bandits surround the protagonist, claiming he can't just leave after taking all their money. They also say that a cheater like him deserves a lesson. The cat says that's exactly what he was referring to, but Gray still doesn't understand the seriousness of the situation. Then the cat tells him not to stand still. After all, he's been chased all day. Gray says this time it's different because Tanitos is by his side and ready for action. The cat says he has the feeling the horse will fall apart after a few steps, but Gray is confident. Soon, the bandits see that the protagonist is trying to leave, and they tell him to stay and fight. In turn, Gray simply tells them to get out of the way. Then he charges forward with his horse, and those who didn't move are struck. Gray uses Tanitos' strength and takes the opportunity to leave the enemies behind. Tanitos' strength is immense, so much so that he leaves the enemies flat on the ground. The entire gang is left fallen because they couldn't catch the protagonist, until Gray is the only one still standing. And the people around see this and say that the gamblers really messed up by picking a fight with this unknown knight. One of the remaining gang members asks if the leader still thinks this knight is just a vagabond. The cat is shocked to see Tanitos solve the situation alone, but Gray says he actually secretly added a few layers of magic to the horse. The next day, the duel is about to begin, and the news spreads among everyone because they hear that the lord of the city will be competing, and it's been a long time since anything exciting happened in Hamlet. The leader of the previous gang also gets excited and says someone paid them good money to participate. He tells the protagonist that with his skills, winning this tournament will be a piece of cake. Gray asks if by doing that, he will earn the title of knight. The leader says that it's not possible to participate in this tournament unless you're a knight, so the lady grants each of them a temporary knight title. But Gray doesn't like it because he wanted to have the real knight title, especially the one with the seal. On the other hand, in front of a banquet, the count enjoys himself and eats a lot, just waiting for the tournament to start, until he asks his niece if she knows where this is going, because if she loses the tournament, she will also lose any remaining honor she has. Irene says that the Becker family's reputation is none of the Count's business. Caspar gets irritated that she no longer calls him uncle. The princess says that if she loses, she will certainly keep her vow, but if she wins, she hopes the Count won't go back on his word. Caspar says he will keep it, but his expression suggests otherwise. Anyway, the person responsible for the tournament announces the rules, and each participating side has their knights. He also says that if Count Caspar loses, he must swear loyalty to Lady Irene, and if she loses, she must accept the engagement with the Count's son. On the Count's side, several knights step forward to participate, but on the princess's side, there are few participants. People wonder how a dozen knights plan to fight against 100, and they even bet on the Count's victory. In turn, Caspar tells Irene not to worry about it, and promises he will go easy on her. Irene asks the soldier Horace if the mercenaries have arrived. He says yes, and they are waiting outside the arena. After that, the tournament begins, and the fight between the knights starts. The participants fight with everything they got. After all, it is the honor of their lords that is at stake, until one of them gets struck on the head and loses. With that, the first round is won by Irene. The second round begins, and Irene wins once again. But after a few rounds, Caspar turns the situation in his favor. Horace says they are losing because they are outnumbered and asks the princess for the opportunity to handle it. Irene says there is no need to rush and asks him to bring in the mercenaries. Soon, Horace understands that her strategy is to use the mercenaries to tire out the Count's troops. The princess says they must surpass the superior strength of the count's forces, and since her numbers are limited, the deployment must be done carefully. After that, the mercenaries arrive, and they find it quick to be called, as they hadn't even left the first game yet. Horace says this is very important for the Becker house, and he hopes they will help the princess win. The mercenaries say they are paid to do their best, but they can't guarantee victory, since the opponent is greater in number. With that, Horace gets super irritated for having to rely on a bunch of mercenaries, until, among them, someone catches his attention. The protagonist asks Horace if he can make him a knight. Horace says that his lady already did that. However, Gray says he doesn't want a temporary title. He wants to be a real knight. After that, Horace says that the man in front of him is very greedy, until the princess speaks, and says that the title of knight is earned by merit and cannot be granted arbitrarily. But she says if he defeats 50 enemy knights, she will make him an official knight. Gray is astonished by the request. Even the cat thinks that number is an exaggeration, and says that woman is asking too much. He tries to make Gray not accept, but his words are ignored by the protagonist, which leaves the cat speechless, as Gray accepts without thinking twice. The princess then says they have an agreement and that she will count on him when the action begins. Even the princess's loyal squire is shocked, but he simply obeys her orders. Meanwhile, the cat asks what Gray has in his head to have accepted that. The protagonist says that Tanitos can easily take down 50 people, so he has nothing to worry about. However, the cat points out an important detail to Gray, and shows that none of the other knights are fighting on horseback, meaning that for Gray to bring Tanitos into the ring, he would first have to win a ground battle, because only the winner has the right to change the type of combat. So he asks if Gray knows anything about fencing. Gray replies that he does not. Then the cat says they need to find a way to fix that. After some time, the princess returns to her post, and as soon as she arrives, the count says he didn't expect her to trust mercenaries like the Red Scorpions, and thus concludes that the Becker family is truly in decline. In turn, the princess simply says that soon the count will discover who is really in decline. After that, one of the mercenaries tells his boss that the princess wants him in the ring. Soon, their leader prepares to fight, and says it's time to show what he's made of. Seeing this, the count falls into despair, because his men are no match for the mercenary leader, as he easily defeats the count's soldiers, and shows that the strength of the mercenaries should not be underestimated. After defeating some of the opponents, the mercenary leader is praised by the audience. Caspar wonders who this mercenary is and how he can win so many times in a row. One of his servants says that this is the leader of the Red Scorpions, known as Killer Paz. A mere mercenary going so far is truly impressive. Soon, the Duke orders that his trump card be used, and claims that it's time for these mercenaries to learn the consequences of going against a count. In the audience, everyone praises Paz's performance and says that the others near him are trash. However, everyone is shocked to see the next knight the count sends out, because the count didn't send an ordinary soldier, but instead a giant monster. Even the princess is startled upon seeing this. The giant says to his opponent that he desires some fun. Thus, Paz says that before that, he needs to discuss extra fees with his lady. Meanwhile, the protagonist tries to learn how to use a sword but finds it very difficult, and even suggests using magic to make it move on its own, but the cat says that's a bad idea. Before the fight begins, much of the city falls silent, as everyone is apprehensive, because a guy who looks like a monster so frightening is about to fight an opponent half his size. The announcer then says that the duel between the count and the princess is about to start, and authorizes the beginning of the match. Soon after, the ogre attacks, but Paz manages to dodge the blow. He relies on his speed, both to dodge and to attack. However, his opponent surprises him, because as soon as Paz attacks, his sword breaks and he doesn't understand why. The ogre is right behind him, and he thinks he needs to dodge quickly. But this time, his speed didn't help, since the opponent struck with all his strength, hitting him squarely in front of everyone, including the princess who hired him. After being hit, Paz is gravely injured, being thrown far away from the arena, and landing at the feet of the crowd that once cheered him. People are horrified and try to help him. On the other hand, the count laughs loudly, and says this is what happens when someone opposes him. Paz manages to get up from the ground, but says that apparently he broke a few ribs. He also says that looking at the situation, he will have to charge double the promised payment. Surprisingly, he jumps before being attacked again. The leader of the mercenaries doesn't want to give up yet, and attacks the opponent once more. Only this time, he manages to injure him in the eyes, blinding his opponent. After that, he prepares for another charge, and runs toward the ogre, using his speed to strike with what's left of his sword. The giant says that his opponent fights dirty, but those are his last words, because right after he falls defeated. Paz says that besides being the leader of the Red Scorpions, he is the most beloved person in the port of Hamlet. And so people applaud him, for he once again proves his fame. As soon as the fight ends, the princess orders Paz to be replaced and taken to a doctor. Far from there, the cat finds the protagonist and asks what he's doing. Gray says he's making a weapon because he can't use a sword, so he thought about creating something he could use. The cat says that if he doesn't hurry, the tournament will end and he won't even get to participate. Gray panics. The duel between Irene and Caspar stretched until midnight, and so far, the princess has been at a disadvantage and the count has prevailed thanks to his larger number of soldiers. Even though the mercenaries were more skilled, they lost due to exhaustion. However, their courage made them persist longer. But Paz realizes that even that won't make them win. After all, the other side has more warriors. While Paz watches the rest of the battle from the rooftop, the master of the knights approaches and calls him. He is furious with the leader of the mercenaries, since half of his men surrendered halfway through the fight. Paz says they are mercenaries, not knights, and claims they were paid to fight, not to sell their lives. Upon hearing this, the master of the knights gets super irritated, but he asks where's the guy who agreed to fight 50 enemy soldiers. Paz doesn't know how to answer and says that Gray might have gone to feed his cat. The master of the knights says this is no time for jokes, because Count Caspar just won another round, and there are only 5 people left on the princess's side, and if they don't act, the outcome will not be favorable to them. At this point, the master thinks he is the only one who can fight, until he senses something approaching and gets startled. Then he looks to see what it is. It is none other than Gray arriving to fight. However, the surprising thing is what he brings with him, since Gray carries a huge gate on his shoulder, and scares everyone present. In turn, the protagonist speaks, and simply asks where his 50 opponents are. Caspar is left speechless witnessing this. Not only him, but the princess as well. She feels a mix of emotions, but she is pleased because she sees in Gray the opportunity to turn the game in her favor. The protagonist asks how the battle is going, but the master of the knights can't even respond, so shocked he is. He simply says that the count still has more than 50 knights on his side. Thus, Gray says he arrived just in time, and heads straight for the ring. After that, the protagonist drops his gate in the middle of the ring, and leaves his opponent quite frightened, because the count's soldier didn't expect to face something like that. Gray climbs to the top of the gate, saying that he is ready for the fight, and he wants to start this as soon as possible. The opponent doesn't know how to react to this, so he simply drops his weapon on the ground, saying to the protagonist that he surrenders. Thus, Gray asks who's next, but the opponents start giving up before even entering the ring. They start fighting among themselves to decide who should go first. However, no one wants to step into the ring to fight, and they prefer to argue among themselves. The count witnesses all of this and feels both nervous and afraid. He asks how the protagonist dares to rip the gate off his palace and use it as a weapon, claiming afterward that he will not tolerate such audacity. Since the protagonist technically won the first battle, he summons his horse. Thus, the count orders that his knights be sent as well, and his subordinate tells all the knights to prepare for combat. So they all form into formation. The leader says that their honor depends on this battle, and he wants to defeat this opponent as quickly as possible. Scared, the cat asks Gray what is happening, because he sees all the soldiers approaching and is left speechless. The people around also don't understand anything, especially when they see the count's palace gate right in front of them. The count himself becomes enraged seeing this and wonders what is going on. His subordinate says that some knights prefer to give up their titles rather than fight, but he says they might have a chance because they can change the mode of competition to a cavalry battle. Caspar says that if that's the only way, then he agrees to proceed with the plan. In turn, the protagonist just waits for the opponents to approach, until the count comes near him and says that his strength is truly impressive. He also says he didn't imagine seeing someone like him participate in this tournament, but states that everyone present would love to see his physical skills in battle. The protagonist realizes that this wasn't part of his plan. Even the princess notices what the count is trying to do, and remembers that according to the tournament rules, the winner has the right to decide how the next match will be conducted. Caspar says that if the princess doesn't accept the cavalry battle, his men won't fight, and this tournament will last forever, and he knows that's not what she wants. Then he asks the protagonist if he is willing to accept the request for a cavalry battle. Gray has one condition for that. He says that if he accepts, the count must send all his men to fight him at once. The princess is astonished by this proposal. Caspar asks if the protagonist would be willing to fight everyone remaining in a single battle. Gray says yes and states that if these guys don't stop quitting halfway through the fights, he won't be able to defeat 50 people. The master of the knights refuses to accept that Gray fights so many at once. On the other hand, confident of certain victory, the count accepts the proposal. Soon the master thinks this is madness, and cannot believe that Gray accepted it. In turn, the princess speaks, and says that Gray is making such a request with great confidence. The protagonist is surprised that she said that, but he says he is certain of his victory and will do it for the princess. Then Irene tells him to show all his courage and strength against the opponents, and wishes that the Holy Spirit be with him. Gray then climbs down from the gate, and thanks the princess for her words, until suddenly, a horse approaches. People look up and see it. Tanitos appears from the rooftop along with a cat, ready to join Gray in the battle. All the Count's soldiers regroup, and their leader says that they are facing only one guy, so it's a perfect opportunity to turn the game with a single attack. Thus, they all attack at once. However, Gray dodges the blows masterfully. After escaping the enemy blades, he finally draws his sword and counterattacks the opponent from atop his horse. The opponent is surprised to be attacked. However, he realizes he was not injured and finds it strained. The cat asks why Gray is using a sword if he doesn't even know how to wield it. The protagonist apologizes but says he just wanted to try it. This is seen by the opponents as a provocation, and their leader becomes even more enraged until the cat notices this and asks what they are going to do. Gray says that fighting with a sword won't work, so he needs to resort to the Lich's classic style. After that, he uses his magic and summons several protective spells, both for him and for his mount. The enemy leader says that the protagonist is standing still and wants to take the opportunity to attack him, but Gray just stares at them with a dark look. Immediately, the enemies start getting hit. The force striking them is brutal, because Tanitos guides his master toward the enemies, striking them along the way. A soldier tells the others not to panic and claims that the protagonist only has riding skills. He says they just need to hit his horse to end the battle. However, when they try to do that, Tanitos' defense magic protects him, and the soldier who attacked is left staring in disbelief. Not only him, but all the others had no chance, because the protagonist is practically trampling everyone. The fallen soldiers think it's absurd, because the strength the protagonist demonstrated in battle is compared to that of a monster. Even the Count becomes scared, claiming that the protagonist must be cheating somehow. The master of the princess's knights is delighted to see that Gray actually won. In the midst of this, the princess picks up a sword from the ground and goes to Gray with it, returning the weapon to its owner. The protagonist thanks her for the gesture and asks if now that he has defeated the 50 opponents in the tournament and fulfilled the promise, she could do the same and make him a legitimate knight. The princess says she will keep her promise and will grant him the title of knight. With that, the crowd goes wild. Thus, before everyone, a great knight is born who will change the entire world. Some people leave the scene angrily because of this, while others cheer for the protagonist. The protagonist himself has no idea about any of this. He still doesn't understand human customs and wonders why he is being tossed into the air. Sometime after the tournament ends, some people gather at the city's castle, because they hear that the knight who defeated 50 men is throwing away gold coins and precious stones. The cat doesn't understand why the protagonist is doing that. Gray says he is distributing the treasure he received to the poor. Last night, he was officially named by the princess as a legitimate knight. She apologized for the modest ceremony, but asked the protagonist to walk by her side from now on. Gray said he would fight for her until his death. Besides being named the Knight of the Silver Moon, he also received a room in the castle. The cat says that this world is crazy, because an apprentice lich managed to become a knight. In turn, the protagonist celebrates, since he finally achieved what he wanted. Now he truly is a legitimate knight. But the cat says that he still has a pinch of wickedness inside him. Gray simply says that now that he has become a knight, he has much to learn and needs to start studying right away. The cat only says not to bother him because he is going to sleep. However, the protagonist says he cannot sleep because he needs his help. He sees in the book that knights always distribute their treasures to the poor. However, Gray doesn't know what treasure or poor people are. The cat explains the concept of wealth and poverty to him. Regarding treasures, he says the castle is full of them, so if Gray wants to search, he can scour the place to find some treasure. However, the cat is shocked to see what the protagonist did, because he didn't expect Gray to actually steal the castle's treasures and distribute them to people, realizing that he truly is a fool without direction. Meanwhile, in Irene's temporary office, some of her soldiers appear, and Irene asks what they want so early. The soldier named Abby Roberts and Horace, the Master of Knights, look a bit embarrassed. Abby Roberts, with all due respect, asks if the princess really trusts Gray. The princess says that just like the others, Abby Roberts himself witnessed Gray's bravery, so she states she needs his strength. Roberts says that they know nothing about who Gray is, much less about his past, and besides, he didn't even remove his helmet during the swearing ceremony, which raises suspicions that he might be a spy for the king. However, the princess says that if Gray were really a spy, she wouldn't be sitting there talking with them now. She also says that suspicion is not a good thing, and says that Abby Roberts is her most trusted servant, and she hopes not to have to speak about this matter again. But soon after, someone appears in the room, saying that the Knight of the Silver Moon stole Count Casper's treasure, and is right now distributing everything in the castle tower to the people. Upon hearing this news, the princess even breaks her quill pen. Her men notice that she is nervous, and they ask if she is alright. The princess says yes, but she wants to immediately speak with Gray. Irene never considered herself a competent lady. Since childhood, she was trained to be a warrior, but being a bit clumsy, she considered herself less than others. Even her fencing instructor would scold her for falling too easily, claiming that there was no way she could become the next Duchess of the Becker family being so weak. However, Irene possesses a quality she herself had not noticed. She is very good at hiding her true feelings, and she also knows how to act since an early age. As Irene walks toward the tower, she wonders what Gray is trying to do. She also thinks that Caspar lost the duel but continues to avoid delivering the oath banner. Irene wishes she could just get rid of them both, and even her guards notice her anger, even though she tries to hide it. Caspar reaches the protagonist first and says that he is an armored thief, not a knight. Gray defends himself, claiming that he is only doing what every knight does, distributing wealth to the poor. However, the Count says that this treasure doesn't belong to Gray, but to him. Thus, he accuses the protagonist of being a thief. Gray had no idea that the treasure he found already belonged to someone, and says there was no way he could know beforehand. After all, there was no name written on it. The Count's shouting can be heard from afar, and Roberts tells the princess it's better to hurry. Of course, besides being very good at acting, Irene has another characteristic essential to being a lady. She thinks that the combination of Gray and Caspar is an excellent opportunity because she has an incredible sense for recognizing timely moments. While the Count argues with Gray, the princess appears and asks if Caspar requested her presence. She also says that the Count had been avoiding her, and she was already thinking that he would not fulfill his promise. Caspar is surprised to see her. Unlike Gray, who greets her, the Count still hasn't set his anger aside, but the princess approaches him and says that if Caspar refuses to fulfill his vows, it will give her the right to immediately strip him of his title. Caspar is surprised by this. However, when he looks at Gray, he concludes that he was ordered by the princess to deliberately distribute his treasure to the people. Irene defends herself, claiming that she has nothing to do with it, and states that she will compensate him for any damage her knight may have caused. After all, she claims that unlike others, she knows how to fulfill her duty. Caspar feels humiliated by this. In any case, he hands over the document of the Oath of Loyalty, but says that the princess will not be able to fight against the king just because she has received a few troops from the Count. Irene says she doesn't need Caspar's concerns about that. In turn, Gray asks if he did something wrong, but the princess says no. On the contrary, Irene says that Gray's actions helped her put Caspar in his place, all thanks to the pressure he suffered. Her soldiers say that the princess is losing control by showing her anger, so she apologizes and composes herself. She says that even so, it's wrong to steal the wealth of others, but she will help Gray fix it and hopes it won't happen again. Otherwise, it will be deducted from his salary. Since she has already achieved what she wanted, Irene says there is no need to stay in Hamlet anymore, and informs that Gray, along with her and the others, will depart the next day. As soon as the princess leaves, Gray asks the cat what a salary is. The cat had already realized how naive and stupid Gray is. However, to him, the most unbelievable thing is that a lady would accept a lunatic as her knight, and he fears that the future may be dark. The next day dawns for everyone. It is time for the princess and her group to depart. Gray says there are a lot of knights there and asks why he didn't see them at the tournament. The cat says that these are common soldiers, that's why they didn't participate, and also that among them are people hired from Caspar's group of 1,000. Soon, the cat has a constant feeling that something bad will happen. Night falls and they set up camp on the road. In the midst of this, a soldier searches for the Knight of the Silver Moon until he finally finds him, and Gray asks what it's about. He says he doesn't know, but says he received an order from Lord Horace to take him to Lady Irene's tent. Inside the tent, Horace is dissatisfied and disagrees with the princess. Irene says that Caspar's oath is an opportunity to force more lords to join the camp they have set up. She says she needs reliable messengers to spread the word, and there is no one more reliable than Horace, so she asks why he won't accept it. Horace refuses to lead Gray as the only one by her side in his absence, since she sent him along with Roberts as messengers. Her loyal squire still distrusts Gray, and once again they get into this subject. The princess asks if, in case Gray had second intentions against her, would Horace be able to stop him? Stopping to think about it, the Master of Knights is shocked. Then Irene says that instead of standing beside her doing nothing, he should go as a messenger to expand her campaign. Soon after, Gray arrives at the tent. The knights' gazes upon him are intense. Thus, the protagonist asks if he did something wrong for everyone to be staring at him like that. Horace approaches Gray and grabs him by the shoulder, saying that he is counting on him to keep the princess safe. After saying that, Horace and Abby leave the camp. After that, Gray is extremely confused because he didn't understand anything Horace said, so he considers asking Irene because he wants to better understand what it means to keep her safe. Gray also asks why the cat had to fall asleep just now, because now there's no one to answer his doubts. The princess notices his nervousness and questions him, but Gray says it's nothing and claims he knows exactly what he has to do. However, the princess realizes it's exactly the opposite, as she sees him lost in his thoughts. Then she says that Gray should simply stay nearby and prevent any threat from approaching her. Irene says that Gray is very strange, since besides all that behavior, he also refused to remove his helmet during the swearing ceremony. She suspects that Gray might be from another country, or maybe not even human, and that if it were under different circumstances, she wouldn't accept him as a knight. However, the protagonist claims he was born in this country and tries to divert her suspicions, but Irene is smarter than she seems, and she says he doesn't need to be nervous and claims she's not doubting his identity by raising those thoughts. On the contrary, she just wants to know more about him, what he did or what he was before they met, because from the moment he swore loyalty to the princess, he became her knight. Thus, she says she will take responsibility for who he is and ensure that Gray is not abused because of it. Gray gets emotional and says that the princess is a wonderful master and he will always be loyal to her. Soon, Irene concludes that Gray is someone easy to deal with, but now she says she doesn't want to talk anymore, and it's been some time since Horace left. And she says to Gray that it's almost time to receive her guest. However, as soon as she says that, an intruder arrives from the top of the tent. He identifies his target and wants to start his cleansing operation. The Crows are a group of assassins based in the southern part of the Kingdom of Isaac. As long as someone is willing to pay, they will kill anyone. From royalty itself to the old and the weak among the Crows, an assassin named Spectre is the most feared of all. Other assassins do what they do for money, but Spectre is a monster who kills for fun. This time, his target is none other than Princess Irene. Thus, he imagines that this will be more fun than usual. However, before he can get close to her, he is stopped by the princess's bodyguard, who throws his sword at him. Gray understood that he must eliminate everyone who tries to approach the princess. Seeing him do this, Irene understands that Gray's intentions are noble, but she says that swords are not meant to be thrown. Spectre ironically says that the princess has a great knight, but the protagonist is willing to do anything to protect her. Upon seeing Gray's eyes, the enemy wonders why he has such an intense killing intent, and wonders if he is also a lich or a necromancer. He also considers that Gray might simply be someone who has killed many people before. Either way, the enemy attacks, and his movements are so fast that Gray doesn't even see him approaching. Even the princess is startled by it, because she saw before her eyes her bodyguard being hit directly. The enemy gloats about having done that. However, to his surprise, Gray starts laughing at the situation. At first, Spectre doesn't understand why, but when he looks at his sword, he realizes that it broke upon striking Gray, and he wonders how that happened. The protagonist says he got scared because the enemy claimed he would cut him into pieces, but now that it didn't happen, he calls him a liar. He also says that liars like him deserve an appropriate punishment. Spectre thinks it's stupid that Gray is attacking him with just a slap, because he claims he can easily defend himself from that. But to his surprise, that's not true, because the slap was much more aggressive than he expected. Spectre wonders what is happening. Meanwhile, the princess thinks that these two really didn't understand the situation, because she saw that the assassin clearly broke his own sword in the first move. The king had the power to ensure that the illegitimate son had a right to succession, and because the illegitimate child was a boy, even with the Grand Duke's will, he was the one granted the inheritance instead of Irene. But it was obvious that this was a conspiracy, as the king wanted to take possession of the Becker family's territory without shedding blood. Some people feared the king's authority, and thus no one would dare to help even knowing the truth. Others, seeing the benefits, tried to assist the feudal lords to gain an advantage from the situation. In short, ever since the day she lost her father, there have been many people wanting the 16-year-old girl to disappear as quickly as possible. Thus, assassination attempts began happening frequently. Back to the present, in the capital of the Becker Duchy, the White City, some soldiers spot movement approaching. Horses by the dozens run toward the fortress, and leading them is Princess Irene. The soldiers celebrate the princess's return, and say to open the gates for her. A girl sees Irene's arrival and says that as expected, she returned alive, and she even heard that Irene found a brave knight during her trip to Hamlet Port. Therefore, she wants to see with her own eyes if the rumors about this knight are true. Shortly after, Irene enters through the gates accompanied by her soldiers, and the people around salute her return, and not only that, but they also see the Knight of the Silver Moon who defeated 50 of the Count's enemies. Meanwhile, the cat asks if Gray understood what Irene said the night before. Being honest, the protagonist says he didn't understand anything because she used many words whose meaning he doesn't know. But one thing he did understand, that he must defeat the king, or he will lose the knight title he earned. Right after that, he comes across the palace, and he is dazzled by what he sees. Along the way, he notices some people who are different from what he is used to. Since everything there is lively and cheerful, Gray says he feels very comfortable. Irene hears him and says she will take it as a compliment. She says that the White City is a lively place, and that's why she must protect it to keep it as it is. Speaking of which, she says she will prepare a new armor for Gray as soon as they arrive at the castle, and asks if he has any specific requests. The protagonist doesn't know what to answer. Irene says that now that he is considered an important member of her family, his outfit must be worthy, and the armor must be made in a proper style. The protagonist says he doesn't know much about that, so he will agree to accept whatever she prefers. The princess says there is one more thing. After they settle in, she will invite all the nobles to a dancing banquet. After all, it's important to let those people know that she returned alive with her troops and horses. Therefore, as a guardian knight, Irene invites Gray to dance with her, because she believes many people will want to meet him, so he must be prepared. From high above the city, an angel observes everything, and says that the target has been located, an immature lich. Now the processes must be applied. He also says that according to the Greystone Treaty, the angels signed with the liches before mutilating the humans. They must observe the situation and avoid any type of action against it. At another moment, already in his quarters, the protagonist stands before his new armor. He says it even looks like an ancient ruin of magnificent design. In turn, the cat can't believe they simply measured the size of the old armor and remade it, and he ironically praises Irene's generosity. But the protagonist doesn't notice the irony and says that his lady is indeed very generous. Soon, the cat reminds him that Irene invited him to dance at the ball and asks if he is prepared. Confused, Gray asks what a ball is. The cat says it's a dancing banquet, a party where everyone gathers and dances. Gray asks what dancing is, and the cat tries to make a demonstration. Seeing the movements, the protagonist tries to imitate them, and says it looks more like a mystical ritual, but he says it's very fun. Then someone appears and asks Gray if he is ready. He tells the maid to wait a moment. After quickly putting on his armor, he answers the door. The girl introduces herself as the Princess Irene's maid and says she is there to escort him to her. Then she leads Gray to the princess's quarters, and as soon as they arrive there, she announces the arrival of the Knight of the Silver Moon. As soon as Gray sees her, he is dazzled, and the princess receives him, dismissing the maid afterward. Seeing Irene all dressed up, the protagonist falls in love with so much beauty. He looks at her dress from top to bottom, paying attention to every detail of the outfit, and is shocked by the richness of the details, because all he can think is that the fabric is beautiful and would be sensational for a mage's robe, completely ignoring Irene herself. Anyway, the princess asks if he is ready. Gray says yes. Soon after, she invites him to walk down the stairs and extends her hand for him to take. However, the protagonist's lack of knowledge about these things prevents him from proceeding. He asks the cat why Irene is just standing there as she said they would walk down the stairs together. The cat simply says to take her hand. Gray doesn't understand why, but the cat tells him to stop asking questions and just take her hand quickly. Before the princess could get angry with him, Gray takes her hand, and thus descends the stairs with her. The protagonist takes the opportunity to compliment her dress. Irene thanks her knight for the compliment, but she is surprised when he asks to wear her dress. The princess doesn't understand what Gray wants, but he insists on the request and asks if he can wear her dress. Irene asks if he really wants to wear a dress. Gray asks what's the problem. Soon, the princess says that he is a man and shouldn't wear a dress, but Gray doesn't understand what would prevent him. This leaves the princess very confused, and Gray himself is confused after all. He doesn't understand human customs. The cat approaches and says he will be exposed if he continues acting weird. Thus, Gray covers it up and changes the subject, claiming he needs nothing but his armor. On the other hand, the princess notices that at no time has Gray removed his helmet or spoken of his past, and now the fact that he wants to try on a dress makes the princess wonder if instead of Gray, he might actually be Grace. After that, they present themselves to the others. A young man announces the presence of the princess, and she descends hand in hand with her knight. Soon, the two stand before the guests, and everyone salutes the princess, bowing before her. However, not everyone apparently likes seeing Gray, since a man knows what he did at the tournament and doesn't like seeing him with the princess. In turn, Irene is pleased. She welcomes everyone and says that this is the 13th commemorative ball of the Becker family and hopes that everyone enjoys the event. She also says she hopes to have a good relationship with the other invited families and also wants to use this opportunity to resolve some unresolved issues. Seeing the princess's posture, the girl from earlier says to her grandfather that Irene is targeting him. Her grandfather knows and says it's fine. The protagonist asks the princess who that old man is. She says that he is Lord Gregory, the third of the Atwood. His family is famous for having a long history of military strength, and he was also the first candidate to win the battle against the king. But Gregory decided to refuse the princess's invitation. Gray asks if she feels bad about it, but the princess says it's fine. With that, she walks over to Gregory and says that the fact he is there tonight means she still has a chance to convince him. Then Irene goes to the man and greets him, calling him uncle. Gregory says it's been a while since he saw her. Irene then invites him to be her first dance partner. Her uncle accepts and says it will be a pleasure. As he takes the princess's hand, Gray wonders why they are so close, until his granddaughter appears and says that just like the two of them, she also wants to dance and invites Gray to be her partner. The protagonist is a bit confused by the invitation, but the girl insists on having him as her partner and extends her hand just like the princess did, saying to the protagonist that she would like to be his dance companion. Just like before, Gray is super confused. He asks the cat why this girl is extending her hand to him. He thinks she might have fractured an ankle and wonders how she could dance that way. The cat says that's not it and says she just wants to dance. However, he recommends that the protagonist keep his distance from her, so Gray literally steps back. Soon, the cat says that's not what he meant, and says that he shouldn't distance himself physically. But that attitude is enough to sadden the little girl. Crying, she asks why her invitation was rejected, and if the knight doesn't find her beautiful enough. The cat thinks that this girl really knows how to be convincing. Then he tells Gray to stop her quickly, or else he might get into trouble. The people around start wondering why someone rejected a request from Miss Shelley, who is considered the most beautiful girl in the world. Gray approaches and says he has no problem with her appearance, and claims it was just a misunderstanding. Then he extends his hand to her, inviting her to dance. After that, he asks the cat if he did the right thing. The cat says that he has no way out, and he'll have to dance to the music now. Shelley stands up and says it will be an honor to accept the invitation. Meanwhile, she thinks she finally got what she wanted, even if it was a bit humiliating, and she would also like to see what he looks like without the helmet. In turn, the cat thinks the girl might be able to manipulate Gray, but she'll have to suffer later for making an idiot like him dance. Their dance begins, and soon Shelley complains that Gray is stepping on her. The situation between them becomes unpleasant, and the protagonist apologizes, saying it's his first time dancing. Shelley says it's also her first time dancing with a man in armor. She tells Gray not to rush, but says he needs to learn to guide her. However, the protagonist says that she dances better than he does, so she should guide him. The girl says it's not about who dances better, it's the man's duty to lead the lady in a dance. The protagonist wonders why she and the princess call him a man and doubts whether he really is one. Anyway, he says that dancing is a lot of fun. Shelley agrees and says that it's excellent training. Watching the dance, Gregory notes that this is the so-called Knight of the Silver Moon, and he heard that he is very strong and capable of great feats. However, he asks why he is wearing armor at a ball. The princess says that it's just a habit of the knight, but changing the subject, she asks if Gregory could reconsider her request. Gregory says he does not refute the talent she has demonstrated as a leader over the past 2 months. He also says that she is very good, but not good enough. He states that his family's ancestral motto is to support only those destined to win. That is the reason they have survived for hundreds of years. Upon hearing this, Irene laments. Back to the protagonist, the girl praises him for having learned, but says it's boring to stay in the hall for so long, and invites him to go for a walk. The two leave the castle, and Shelley takes the opportunity to rest her feet, as she sees they are very swollen. Soon she says she won't be able to dance anymore like that. She blames the protagonist for stepping on her foot and causing this. Gray deeply regrets it and apologizes. However, Shelley doesn't want apologies, but something to treat her injury, so she asks him to find an ointment or something like that. The cat says that this girl is hitting on Gray, but he has no idea what that means. Thus, the cat explains what flirting is, but also explains that if he tries to reproduce with her at that age, he will be arrested. Gray doesn't understand what reproducing means, so the cat says it's too early to explain that. Even without fully understanding these things, he knows he has to help with her injury. Shelley gets a little scared when Gray grabs her foot, but he uses his magic to heal her. Soon the girl is dazzled upon seeing him do that, and asks if a knight can use magic. In the midst of all this, a young man approaches and is shocked to see the scene. He says he went looking for Shelley because he was worried about her, but he can't believe another man was holding her foot. He soon asks if all the knights of the Becker family are that shameless, and even challenges Gray to a duel. Gray was about to accept when his cat stops him. He says that Irene is trying to win the support of the girl's family, and Gray would cause political problems if he got into a fight with someone associated with her. The cat tries to help Gray explain himself, but Shelley takes the lead and acts charmingly. With this, the cat wonders what her problem is. From above, the angel observing the protagonist notices that the magic used was divine, and wonders if an undead is capable of using something like that. Inside the castle, the princess hears some noise and wonders what is happening, until someone appears and says that something strange is going on outside, because the Knight of the Silver Moon apparently insulted Lady Shelley of the Gregory family. Irene thinks that by now, this cannot be a coincidence, so she decides to go there to check it out. The boy in love with Shelley demands that Gray explain himself. but the protagonist doesn't know what to say. This makes him seem even more suspicious to the boy, and in front of everyone, he demands that Gray explain why he humiliated Lady Shelley. Gray asks the cat what he did wrong, and finds this troublesome boy very strange. Since the protagonist doesn't say anything, the boy asks Shelley to say what happened. In turn, she says the boy misunderstood, and states that the Knight of the Silver Moon was just helping her with her foot injury. The boy says that Shelley is only harming herself by trying to defend that guy, because there is no medicine that can instantly heal someone without leaving a single scratch, and accuses Gray of being a deceiver. All this confusion makes some people around start thinking bad things about the protagonist. He, in turn, is super confused, and asks the cat why everyone is using difficult words whose meanings he doesn't know. The cat says that this is by far his biggest problem, and says that if he doesn't explain himself soon, his reputation will be ruined, and he might even end up dead. In the midst of the confusion, the princess appears and asks what is happening. Gray sees her arrival as a light at the end of the tunnel, and asks for help, claiming that everyone is saying things he doesn't understand. The troublesome boy says that this night is unacceptable. Irene then asks what is going on. Helk says he went to the garden and witnessed this knight hitting on Shelley. Gregory asks his granddaughter if she was touched by the knight. The princess tells her uncle to calm down, and she wants to hear what Gray has to say. The protagonist says that he had stepped on Shelley's foot while dancing with her and ended up hurting her, so he was just helping her with the injury. Irene asks Shelley if that's really what happened, and the girl even agrees, but she asks Gray to use his magic again in front of everyone, to prove the truth of his words. However, the protagonist says he cannot, because it's not possible to use it a second time in such a short period. Gray injured himself using divine magic, since he is an undead, and he needs to recover before doing it again. After all, he can barely control his armor now. His excuse doesn't convince the troublesome boy, who accuses Gray of threatening Shelley to agree with his story. The girl's grandfather buys into this narrative, and tells Irene to control her knight before coming to him to ask for help. The princess apologizes to her uncle but states that she trusts her knight. She says she will personally take care of this and find out the truth, because she won't let a liar go unpunished, and if she discovers that someone is tarnishing the name of the Becker family, she will make that person pay. The troublesome boy trembles at this statement. Gregory says that for now it's better for the princess to stay out of his family's affairs and calls Shelley to leave with him. The next morning after the ball, a troop marches toward the castle. Horace says that Count Felder has arrived to help with his army, and he states that now that the military strength of the 3 counts of the Becker Duchy is in the White City, the situation will be in their favor. The princess says that she had just returned to the city and Edward Felder came right afterward, and she thinks that's too much of a coincidence. By the way, she asks what the origin of the guy who accused Gray last night is. Horace says that was Matthew of the Modine family, one of Shelley's fanatic suitors, and states that he accused Gray out of pure jealousy. Irene says that at the moment she has no further concerns, and now she wants to go greet Count Felder. Then she goes to the gate to speak with her uncle Felder. Felder asks if he is very late, but she says no, that this is the perfect time. Speaking of which, he asks if Gregory made his opposition clear. The princess says yes, and tells him how their conversation went. Soon Felder says that the old man is indeed grumpy, and even suggests forcing him to join their side. But Irene says she doesn't want to go down that path. Felder claims he was just joking, and tells her not to worry. Irene then says her uncle is as playful as ever. Speaking seriously, Felder mentions that for some people, reason doesn't make sense in the first place, and he fears Gregory will only realize it when it's too late. The princess thanks her uncle for the advice, but before proceeding with anything else, she asks what's inside that carriage. Her uncle says that carriage belongs to his son, little Jimmy. He also says that the boy isn't well and cannot be exposed to the sun on medical advice, and he brought him because it's safer to have him close than to leave him alone at home. Irene asks if she can see the boy. Felder agrees and says she can go to the carriage. Thus, one of the guards tells the boy that the princess wishes to speak with him. So before the princess, he introduces himself as Jimmy Felder. Irene says that she caused some trouble for his father and apologizes for that. Jimmy says it's fine and affirms that it was all his father's will. After meeting him, Irene says that her uncle has a very cute son, and the boy's father says that everyone says that after meeting his boy, since they had a long journey, the princess invites them into the castle. And then everyone heads inside. Already in her meeting room, Horace says that Felder's help is another card in her favor, and with that, the situation has improved. However, the princess doesn't seem satisfied with it. Horace says she's uneasy about something and asks if he can help somehow. Irene says that she finds it too coincidental that Felder appeared now, and that his son has a pleasant appearance, but nothing like the father. And more importantly, she noticed the boy's white hair. Elsewhere in the castle, Matthew Modine walks through the corridors and reaches Felder's quarters. The Count asks what the boy is doing there and already knows what he did. Matthew apologizes but says he never imagined that Irene would defend the Knight of the Silver Moon. Soon he begs for another chance and promises he will get rid of that knight from the Becker family's guard. In the protagonist's room, he is writing something, which arouses the curiosity of his cat. Gray says he is making a list of things he must do as a knight. At the ceremony to become a knight, Miss Irene made him read some vows to bravely fight against tyranny and all evils, to fight for the defenseless and help those who seek aid, not to harm any woman and to assist his fellow knights, to be true to his friends and love them until death. Gray says that liches and demons don't make vows often, but they honor their words, so he needs to live by these promises as soon as possible. And he wishes to start by helping anyone who asks for his help, so he runs off through the White City. But the cat suggests that he shouldn't go into the city now, and the protagonist doesn't understand why, until he gets hit with a tomato. Gray's reputation among the people is not good. Some see him as an infamous scoundrel who shouldn't even dare to step on the city streets, because he is now known as a manipulator of young girls. Gray asks why the people's reception changed so suddenly. The cat says he doesn't think it has anything to do with him personally. He also says that after the ball, rumors started spreading about him throughout the White City, but it wasn't an attack, it came from the Becker family. That's why people think Gray is bad because of these rumors. The protagonist feels bad, but the cat tries to console him, and says it's better to let those people believe the rumors when they don't even care to know the truth. From afar, the one responsible for spreading these rumors watches Gray. His friend says that the knight has a very strong mind and isn't even nervous, but Matthew says it doesn't matter because a group is ready to kill him. While the protagonist walks through the streets, he says they are very busy, except for the strange looks people are giving him. The cat says that Gray should return to the princess and report this to her. Until at a certain moment, a boy runs up and calls for him, and asks for the help of the white-armored knight. Gray sees this as his great opportunity to shine, so he says that no matter the problem, he will help the boy. However, the cat scolds him, saying he should hear the request first, not just agree right away. A crowd gathers and blocks the streets. Shelley, who is in a carriage, is prevented from proceeding because the street is blocked. She asks what's going on, and her driver says it has something to do with the Knight of the Silver Moon. Back to the protagonist, he understands that the boy's sister was captured by bandits, and they are demanding he find the knight. The cat says that this is clearly a trap and Gray shouldn't go, but the protagonist says the boy asked for his help, and he cannot refuse and just stand by doing nothing. As soon as he arrives, the gang of boys says that the knight actually came, and they call him an idiot. Gray says he heard something about bandits, but he only sees a bunch of kids. The boy says he did what they agreed to, and now he wants his sister back. Then the kidnapper says he's a man of his word and throws the sister with full force. Her brother gets very worried about her, but the protagonist intervenes in her favor and catches the girl before she hits the ground. After that, Gray asks if she is okay, and the girl says yes. Then he puts her down safely and asks if all these boys who tried to set him up are unarmed. The leader of the gang simply laughs at the situation, and the boy who led the protagonist there apologizes for what he's about to do, but says he is under threat. Right after, he shouts for everyone to hear that the Knight of the Silver Moon tried to kidnap someone. The leader of the gang reinforces it, saying that this knight doesn't even spare children. The girl who had been kidnapped starts demanding that Gray let her go. Very confused by all this, the protagonist asks what is happening. Some angry people surround the protagonist, intending to lynch him in the town square, and they try to pull him off his horse. Gray insists that he didn't do anything wrong. The little girl who was the bait convinces everyone that she was in danger. Meanwhile, her brother moves away and enters an alley. The leader of the gang calls him, telling the boy to report the situation to the young master, saying that with this job, they will get a lot of money. The boy even feels a little sorry for the knight, but also thinks about the reward. However, he is caught red-handed, because Shelley arrives just in time to stop him from reporting, and says that the boy is fully aware that he is doing something wrong. He asks who she is, but Shelley says it doesn't matter who she is, and instead asks who the young master is that promised to pay for this service. Afraid, the boy even starts to cry. Not much different, the protagonist also becomes apprehensive in the midst of this situation. He was captured by the townspeople, who keep scolding him because they believe he is a bad man. Even the cat got caught up in this, and is also taking the blame. As he is being taken away, the people start speaking all kinds of absurdities about Gray, and they want Princess Irene to deal with his case. However, something surprises them. Shelley appears in the middle of the commotion, and the man leading this riot is stunned to see her. They know she's the girl from the rumors and wonder what a noble is doing there. Shelley asks why so many people are gathered. The leader says they are about to teach a lesson to the knight who intimidated her. Soon after, she asks if they are referring to the Silver Moon Knight, because if that's the case, she states they are mistaken, since this knight didn't mistreat her, but rather helped her. The leader of the movement confronts her, saying that everyone in town is saying the opposite. Not only that, but this knight was just caught trying to kidnap a little girl. Upon hearing this, Shelley asks to see this supposed little girl. Then a woman presents the girl and says that Shelley can ask her anything, and the girl will confirm the story. Thus, Shelley approaches the girl. The girl starts saying several things. However, Shelley reveals that this child is actually a con artist. She shows everyone that it wasn't a girl at all. It was actually a boy wearing a wig. Everyone is left in shock after learning this. In turn, Shelley says they were tricked by a scammer. She also tells her soldier to bring the others as well. Shortly after, the entire gang appears, exactly the same ones who had screamed for help. Shelley says they are just victims too, since they heard the rumors and decided to play a prank. Somewhat embarrassed, they confirm the story. Soon the people realize they had been deceived and almost harmed an innocent person. Shelley states that they are being used to do evil, and orders them to untie the knight. By the way, she says that when Princess Irene granted Gray the title of knight, she also gave him the title of baronet and a fief. In other words, these people insulted the honor of a baron without any reason, and as a baron, he has the right to punish each of them. Fear takes over everyone, and they try to justify themselves. In turn, Gray asks if he really should punish these people. Shelley replies that he should. Thus, having dared to insult his honor as a knight, Gray declares that he will punish them all. Soon they start begging for forgiveness, promising that it will never happen again. However, Gray says it's too late now, and mercy is not something criminals can beg for. But he has an idea. Gray modifies the sign the people had made him carry, and says that now they must carry this sign wherever he goes, and only then will they be forgiven. The people can't believe what they heard, and are shocked. Even Shelley is impressed by such an attitude. She says Gray is very funny, thinking that he is simply solving this situation with humor. But seriously, Gray says that he will keep his knight's word and will grant forgiveness to those who obey what he said. Watching all this from above, Felder tells Matthew that this is what happens when you give someone a second chance. After all the trouble passes and the misunderstanding is resolved, Gray thanks Shelley for her help. She says she didn't do anything special and just repaid the favor from before. By the way, Shelley says it would be better if Gray reported this to the princess. She didn't say anything in front of everyone, but the person who framed him was the young master Matthew from the internal Becker camp. He approached her at the ball, and Shelley fears that Matthew's purpose was to alienate Irene, so he should be investigated. The cat says that this girl is strange and remembers that her family refused to join the Beckers, so he wants to understand why she is helping Gray. Gray then questions her, and Shelley says that if she got too close, she could drag her family into a war. However, she sees no harm in telling Gray all this. Thus, the cat's suspicion about her only increases. Now she says she has to go, and advises Gray to go to Irene and report everything. Then the protagonist says goodbye to her, but before leaving, he notices some movement. Out of nowhere, Matthew emerges from a dark alley, and he tries to kidnap Shelley in broad daylight. Her guards also notice this. Matthew tells everyone not to approach, otherwise he threatens to kill the princess. Shelley is startled by Matthew's sudden appearance, and he notices the surprised look on her face. Matthew claims he did everything he could to keep her out of this war, but says Shelley's mistake was meddling where she wasn't called. He also says he was abandoned by his lord and blames Shelley, because besides helping some random knight, she also dragged her family into a war they didn't even want to be part of. The guards call him crazy upon hearing these accusations. Matthew says he is crazy indeed, and says that even though he failed to sow discord, if he can eliminate that idiot knight, then the Lord will be happy to welcome him back. He knows the knight is strong enough, and declares that he will let Shelley go if Gray tears off one of his arms or legs. Shelley says Matthew truly is insane, and thinks that Gray isn't her subordinate, so he wouldn't do something like that for her. Regardless, Matthew demands that Gray sacrifices himself, claiming that a true knight should not just stand there and watch a lady die. The protagonist understands the demand, and says that if that is the demand, he will accept removing one of his arms to save Shelley. He claims it's just an arm and a leg, and after tearing off his own arm, he says Matthew better keep his word. Shelley's guards are left in shock at what Gray did. Even the supposed villain is stunned, saying that Gray is the real lunatic among them. However, the protagonist says he is not crazy, but a true knight. After that, he uses his own amputated arm as a weapon and throws it at Matthew. As soon as Matthew falls to the ground, the guards pin him down. Shelley, meanwhile, looks at the severed arm and realizes it's just an empty piece of armor. Gray says he hid his real arm inside the armor without the enemy noticing. Shelley then praises his intelligence and thanks him again for saving her life. Gray says he simply fulfilled his duty as a knight. Even lying on the ground, Matthew asks if Gray thinks he is safe just because he defeated him. He claims that all of this is Shelley's fault, because if she hadn't helped that night, her family wouldn't be in trouble, and when the day comes, she will be holding her grandfather's corpse and crying over it, regretting everything. Elsewhere, someone opens their eyes after being knocked out. Some bandits say he finally woke up, we see that Gregory has been captured by them and is being threatened. They say that this mansion is very well located and there is no one nearby. Besides, the guards protecting the place are very weak. This means they have plenty of time to talk before anyone finds out. Gregory asks what they want to talk about. One of them asks if the old man isn't curious about who they are or why they made him a hostage. Gregory says there's no point in asking if they won't answer, and after all, he's not the one begging for a conversation. Soon, the leader of the bandits says the old man is pretty confident, but says he doesn't want to waste time with useless talk. He throws a knife at the old man, but Gregory shows no reaction. The bandit says Gregory will now write a letter to the fief and request troops to support the Becker family against the king. Gregory doesn't understand the request after all. This bandit isn't even one of Irene's men, but the bandit says the old man shouldn't worry about who they are, and that all he needs to do now is send a letter. Even under threat, Gregory refuses. The bandit says he has no choice and claims that his powerful title of count won't help him in this situation. Then he threatens to kill everyone in the mansion if the old man doesn't write the letter, but Gregory says that if he dies, the bandit won't have his seal. Thus, immediately with his death, his son would inherit his title, and a will approved by the archbishop cannot be contested, not even by the king. He also asks how Felder could send such an idiot to kidnap him, and says the bandit should ask his boss better instructions for dealing with a situation like this. This leaves the bandit extremely irritated. In Becker Castle, Irene talks with her uncle, saying they need to discuss the distribution of the troops, and also about the formation against the king, until a messenger enters the room saying he has something important, because a message has just arrived for Lord Felder. Felder asks for a moment of leave, and steps out to see what it's about. Irene thinks about what this message could be. Then she asks Roberts to send Horace to follow her uncle's messenger, along with other men. Felder reads the letter that has just arrived. Judging by the words written, as expected, Gregory found out that he was the one behind it. After that, he orders the messenger to go back and tell the others to act as instructed, and as long as they do so, they don't need to worry about the old man spilling the beans. Shortly after, he returns to the meeting room. Irene asks what happened, but Felder says it's nothing important, just a trivial letter from the fief. The princess maintains her composure, but she doesn't believe that excuse. By the way, she says she forgot to mention something, that due to the war preparations, White City is under martial law, and without the princess's orders, it is forbidden to open the city gates at night. Thus, she becomes curious about how her uncle's messenger entered the city and questions him about it. Back at Gregory's mansion, one of the bandits asks why after so long the messenger still hasn't returned. Until looking through the window, he tells his boss that someone has come back. But it's not the messenger, it's a girl. The boss says that's Shelley, a girl from the old man's family. Shelley enters the house and says she's back, but she sees that the corridor ahead of her is very dark and there isn't a single candle lit. Besides that, no one came to greet her. She remembers that she warned her grandfather not to trust the maids from White City, and later she plans to fire them all. Right behind her, the leader of the bandits appears and immediately captures the girl, saying that this is a true gift from the gods. Gregory sees his granddaughter and is surprised. The girl can only mumble, since her mouth is gagged. The gang leader says that the old man is hard to convince, but now that his granddaughter is there, the situation changes, and he claims that everyone in the city knows how much the old man spoils this girl. Soon he asks if the old man knows what will happen to her if he doesn't write the letter. Gregory says that if the bandit touches his granddaughter, he will tear him apart. The bandit says that in the state the old man is in now, he could do whatever he wanted to the girl right in front of him, and even so the grandfather wouldn't be able to do anything about it. He also says that besides being tied up, Gregory is just an old man who could barely fight without hurting himself. After that, he removes Shelley's gag, claiming that without it, the old man would be able to hear her screams. However, instead of screaming, Shelley calls the bandit an idiot and says his threats are ridiculous. She also says that he apparently has never managed to threaten a person before and claims that his boss doesn't know how to choose competent bandits. Angrily, he hits Shelley and tells her to shut up. Sarcastically, the bandit says that the girl is just like her grandfather. Despite looking cute, she has a fierce mind. Now he says he will show whether his threats work or not. Shelley is not intimidated by him, and the bandit calls her stubborn. But before he could do anything, the protagonist's cat appears and interferes, scratching his face and preventing him from harming the girl. Not only that, but the cat calls for Gray. Soon a magical portal opens on the ground. The gang leader doesn't understand what's happening and is completely lost, like a blind man in a shootout. A flashback reveals that before entering, Shelley had arranged a plan with the protagonist. Gray suggested going in and saving everyone, but Shelley said that the mansion is big and has many rooms, so it wouldn't be possible to know exactly where her grandfather was being held. So the protagonist asked how he could proceed. In that case, Shelley suggested going in alone and letting herself be captured so she would be taken to where her grandfather was, and then Gray would have to find a way to enter afterward. The protagonist said that his armor is heavy and noisy, so he couldn't sneak in, but if he could find the right location, he could go straight there, as long as she managed to keep the cat with her. The cat didn't agree with that because he didn't want to be used as bait. However, the protagonist said he only needed to keep this around his neck. This amulet is a device stolen from the Lich, and when she found Gregory's location, he should throw the amulet on the ground and call Gray's name. Back to the present, the bandit wonders how someone could appear out of nowhere like that. Shelley thinks that this is definitely magic, since she has seen Gray use magic before. The protagonist says that in the end, all sins will be removed, and all souls will ascend. There is not a single space for shadows where the sunlight touches. He, the Silver Moon Knight, in the name of the Holy Spirit, will cast sanctions against the enemies. From above, the angel continues to observe the protagonist. He is a messenger of the Divine Spirit who usually passes through this road, and he is impressed by what he sees. The protagonist manifested physically before his enemies and scared them quite a bit. One of the bandits approaches the boss and says that this is the Silver Moon Knight, the same one who has been in the spotlight lately for great deeds. The boss asks if he's scared, and says that even if this knight is strong, he is still alone, and orders everyone to attack together to defeat him. Soon, the bandits charge toward the protagonist, and Gray simply waits for them to get closer. He barely moves when attacked, and uses strategy to turn the situation in his favor. As soon as the enemy is where Gray wants him, he strikes him with his sword, throwing the enemy far away. Their boss gets super irritated, but tells his men not to be afraid, claiming that the knight has only physical strength and nothing more. Thus, once they surround him, they'll have the advantage. However, the protagonist disagrees with that. He is attacked by the enemy, but the hand of the bandit leader gets trapped by a magical chain, to the point that he can't move. Gray spares no magical effort, since he's not good at close combat. He relies on his magic to fight the enemies. Shortly after, he defeats them all. Thus, Shelley and her grandfather are freed, and they can talk to each other as much as they'd want. However, Gregory hasn't forgotten about Gray, and remembers that he was the one who caused a commotion with his granddaughter at Irene's ball. Not only that, but the fact that he appeared suddenly, and the magical light-infused chains used in battle catch the old man's attention even more. Gregory thinks that the only human in this world capable of freely using magic is a paladin of the Sacred Order, so if Irene managed to gain favor from the Sacred Order, it's natural that she wouldn't want to make it public, so Gregory concludes that he needs to re-examine the Becker family and the princess's abilities. In turn, the protagonist asks what he should do with the bandits. Shelley says she'll take care of it, but before doing anything, she asks if the leader's name is Eddie Daniel. The bandit asks how she knows that. Shelley says she knows a lot of things after all. She's a free woman and can find and know many strange things these days. She says she knows that Daniel's sister is the same age as her and lives on Sephora Street, number 38, and also that his mother is blind. Daniel becomes desperate and begs Shelley not to do anything to his family, claiming that they have nothing to do with his business. Shelley says she wouldn't do that after all. Those people have nothing against her, but she asks what will happen to the witnesses who were ordered to attack her family. Because now that the mission failed, even she knows who Daniel is and knows everything about his family, meaning whoever sent him must know too. Then Shelley offers two options. The first is to reveal the identity of who sent him, and the second is to die right there along with the incriminating evidence against himself. Daniel says that opposing the contractor is the same as dying and having his family wiped out, and he hopes Shelley keeps her word and doesn't harm his family. Right after, Daniel bites his own tongue, because he would rather do that than tell the truth. Shelley finds the way he chose to escape pathetic, until she notices something different. Her grandfather says that the Becker family is outside to take care of this. He also says that Irene wastes no time, and apparently she was following the messenger who was sent to the fief. Then he says that they should go meet them, because there's no reason to keep waiting. Now it's time to talk to Irene again. Speaking of Irene, she questions her uncle, and asks if he has something to tell her. Felder gets cornered and says that for some people, reason makes no sense, and only when they get hurt do they understand the correct alternative. Irene says that she didn't allow him to interfere in her affairs with Gregory, but Felder still tries to shift the blame onto her, saying that his niece thanked him for his assistance, so he believed he was doing the right thing, now claiming that the old Gregory will change his mind. Felder also compares Irene with her father and says that the difference between the two is that choosing to support her is a great risk. He also says that when Irene was weak, he did many things for her, so his niece should be more grateful. In turn, the princess says she learned a big lesson today and leaves the meeting room. Outside, Roberts tells the princess that Felder is nothing but a joke who deceived them, because after sending a letter supporting the Becker family, the old count got involved in this accident so that the Gregory family would think the Beckers were responsible. He also says that Felder should be more courteous and not demand gratitude from the princess, but Irene tells her soldier to calm down. because attacking him now would shake the forces that have just joined them, and if Felder has a hidden goal, then it will be something that should make him happy when it is revealed. But besides that, she asks if Gregory is all right. The soldier says yes, since Gray handled everything and saved the old man from danger. After that, the princess goes to Gregory and asks forgiveness for finding him so late. Gregory says it's all right and asks if she spoke with Felder. The princess says yes and explains Felder's whole plan to Gregory. She also mentions the fact that the boy doesn't resemble his father, so both suspect that this boy may actually be the king's illegitimate son, who is being protected. However, Gregory asks why Felder would bring the child with him to White City. Irene doesn't know either, and now the only thing left is to observe how this all unfolds. Speaking of Felder, he goes to his chambers, and upon opening the door, he finds the boy, who asks why Felder came to see him at this hour. Soon after, he deduces that Felder might be in trouble. Felder notices the boy's perceptiveness, then bows before him, and apologizes for meeting him now. Jimmy says there's no need for such formality, as he doesn't like hearing those things, but asks what happened that made Felder come there for help. The Count says the problem is the Silver Moon Knight, because he was the one responsible for sabotaging his plans since the Hamlet port. He also says that he is a strange guy. No one knows his origins, but they notice his childish behavior most of the time. However, he has great resilience, doesn't care about gossip, and is also very powerful, with the courage to defeat 100 men if necessary. And most importantly, he is loyal to the princess, which makes it very problematic to go against her. Thus, Jimmy understands that Felder wants this knight out of his way, and agrees to help him with that, assuming a shadowy form. After all, he is curious about this guy now. Jimmy's dark appearance even frightens a war veteran like Felder. However, he is happy to have the help he needs. Not far from there, a bat is captured, and an angel says that a new target has been confirmed, and it's just a lesser vampire, so she requests permission to eliminate it. However, her leader does not authorize it, and says she must act according to the Lich protocol, and until the other side kills a human, she can only watch without doing anything. The angel blames her teacher and claims he is protecting these divergents too much, and she is worried about what kind of creature will emerge now that there is already a lich and a vampire. Because of the agreement, they can only observe the divergence without interfering, but the teacher tells Catherine to calm down, as it is her duty to respect the rules. The next day, at the city palace, the princess gathers the counts and asks for their opinion about the defense alignment. Felder says that with Gregory's army, they can create a longer defensive line. The old man says he has no problem with stretching the defensive line, but does not want his army on the same level as Felder's. They both throw jabs at each other because even though they agreed to fight side by side, they still don't like each other, until suddenly, Jimmy appears to talk to his father. Felder acts very well as a father and says the boy should be in his room and not wandering around. Jimmy also acts like a normal boy, begging his father to play with him, but Felder says he's busy and tells the boy to find someone else to play with. Then Jimmy says he wants to play with that knight, and points directly at the protagonist. Shortly after, they are already in a dungeon. Gray thought they were going to play, so he asks why they are going into the depths of the castle. Jimmy tells him not to worry about it, because they are almost there. As soon as they arrive, Jimmy says that this is the underground park, where no one will bother them. Shelley says that actually this is the city dungeon, and asks why the boy brought them there. Jimmy tells the young lady to watch her words, because he only invited the Silver Moon Knight, and she showed up as a busybody. She says she was just bored, and that's why she decided to go with them. Then Jimmy says that if she insists so much, he agrees to let her participate, and says they will play a game called The Fearless and the Dragon. It is said that long ago, there was an evil dragon living in the dungeons who kidnapped the white-haired princess living in the city, which enraged the population. Eventually, the fearless hero emerged and killed the dragon, and that's why he thinks this story is amazing. But Jimmy takes the opportunity to use one of his abilities called the Illusionist's Eye. With it, he plans to trap the two inside his story, and says that Shelley will be the fearless hero, while the knight will be the dragon. Thus, they will become mortal enemies, and from now on, they must fight. Thus, the protagonist steps into character, and draws his sword, ready for combat. Since now Shelley is an enemy, but before starting, he would like to say something. He says he doesn't want to be the dragon, and asks if he can be the fearless hero instead. Jimmy is shocked to hear this, and wonders why his trance magic didn't work on the knight. He knows his magic has never failed against a human before, and wonders if the knight's magic is stronger than his. Meanwhile, the protagonist's cat tells him to stay quiet, since now he is just the evil dragon's mount and at his service. Then Jimmy realizes that he actually missed his magic target. He sees that the cat was hit instead of the knight, but he tries to cast the spell again. However, as soon as he does it, the effect is the same as before. Thus, Jimmy was completely ignored and gets irritated. While he tries to understand the situation, Shelley appears behind him and startles him, and he remembers that she was supposed to be captured by his magic and wonders why she is holding a brick. Shelley tells the princess to step aside. Then he realizes that she is under hypnotic trance, but wonders why she is calling him princess, until he remembers the story he told and realizes that he was the only one left, so now he is the princess. Shelley says for the princess to step aside because the fearless hero will face the dragon. On the other side, Gray is fighting the dragon, and Shelley approaches him with the brick, hitting Gray right on the head. He doesn't understand why he's being attacked, but actually the one who gets scared is Jimmy himself, because with just one brick, Shelley knocked down both the knight and the cat. After that, she looks at Jimmy with a terrifying look and invites him to return to the castle. That's enough to make the boy fear her, telling Shelley not to come near him. Then he screams for help, and deep within the dungeon, the boy's screams echoed throughout the entire day. Back on the upper floors of the castle, several doctors are called to the medical wing. The princess demands an explanation from Gray as to why Shelley fell into a deep coma after going with him and little Timmy to the dungeon. The protagonist says it wasn't just Shelley. Even his cat passed out, and they don't know how to explain the reason for it. The princess thinks that according to what was said, they just went there to play, until Abby Roberts appears and says that the doctor's diagnosis is ready. He says that according to the doctor, both the cat and Miss Shelley were infected by dark magic that requires a priest from the church for treatment. Irene thinks that if Jimmy was responsible, why wasn't Gray affected? And she tries to think of an answer to this question. Meanwhile, a bat carries a vial. Upon arriving at the location, it assumes a female form and says to her master named Jones that she brought the food. However, Master Jones does not receive her well. We see that Jimmy is actually Master Jones. Crying, he tells the vampire that she smells bad as always. Dora says that her master has been crying since yesterday and asks who beat him up, because she will deal with it immediately. But Jones tells her not to do that, because if someone finds out, they'll be in trouble. Jimmy says that a human girl threatened him with a brick and then hugged him in public, and that's why he's ashamed of himself and wants revenge. Dora keeps laughing at him, making Jimmy even more irritated. He says it's all Dora and Felder's fault, because if he hadn't asked for help, he wouldn't be in this situation, and now the suspicions about him will only grow. In fact, Dora says she doesn't think it's necessary to complicate things even further, because as long as he gives the order, it doesn't matter if it's Gregory, the Silver Moon Knight, or even the princess. Dora would kill anyone, even without a reason. However, Jimmy doesn't like that at all. He says they can't take the initiative to kill someone without a reason, because that was the agreement they made with the divine spirits. He also says that their actions are not always discreet, but angels are always watching, and if a vampire kills someone, an angel will definitely come after them. The scene cuts to Catherine, with her teacher trying to calm her down, saying that she is a mature angel and shouldn't talk to lower vampires, much less use her sword in impulsive actions. Catherine says she's just cleaning her sword and has no intention of using it, but her master knows her well and knows her real intentions, which is why he tries to ease things. Back to the vampires, Dora says she understands what her master is saying, but states that this impasse puts the vampires at a disadvantage and asks what she should do about it. Jimmy says he has already planned how to defeat the Silver Knight, so he orders Dora to send a message to the king, asking him to dispatch the shadow troops. Then Jimmy drinks the blood and finds it horrible because it tastes like wine, claiming that he hates alcohol. Dora says that this blood was taken from a drunk, because that way it wouldn't raise any suspicions, and there are even vampires in the north using pig's blood. Jimmy says he's a pureblood vampire and doesn't like that idea at all. He also says that he will revive the great race of true blood, because he is the hope of the vampires. Dora gets super happy upon hearing her master say that. However, the next morning, Jimmy gets startled when he wakes up, because he comes face to face with Gray and asks what he's doing in his room. The protagonist says he was ordered to play with him, and the princess told him to take care of the boy. Irene also said that the game they played last time was too dangerous, so this time they need to play something lighter. That's why Gray says he will stay with Jimmy in the absence of his father, and invites him to go for a walk outdoors under the sunlight. However, judging by Jimmy's reaction, apparently the road to the rebirth of the pureblood race still has a long way to go. After that, the protagonist decides to go horse riding around the city, but by doing so, he draws a lot of attention, but not to himself, rather to a young man in armor, whom he carries with him on his horse. Some around greet him and even invite him for tea, but Gray just wants to take the young man for a ride. Jimmy doesn't like the solution they found for him to walk in the sun, and wonders how something like this could happen to a pureblood vampire like him. Previously, the protagonist had apologized as he didn't realize that he feared the sun. Jimmy insisted he close the curtains, claiming that with them open, something bad could happen. Gray said that as a night's son, Jimmy couldn't stay in his room all day and should go outside a bit to overcome that fear of the sun. However, the boy disagrees and tries to kick the knight out of his room. However, Gray said he couldn't do that because the princess had requested that he take care of Jimmy all day long. So he wanted to make this day fun for the boy. Jimmy asks if Gray does everything he's told to do, because he shouldn't just obey anyone. Irritated by so much rebellion, the protagonist punches the wall and causes a huge mess, claiming that Princess Irene also instructed him to beat up a child if they didn't listen. The little vampire witnessed with his own eyes the protagonist's power and thinks it would be very suspicious if he didn't do what he wanted. So he had to give in and go out wearing armor under the sun. Back to the present, while walking through the streets, Gray sees the children from before. He approaches the troublemaker boys, but only warns them not to hang around alleys because they might get into trouble. The boy who had led him into the trap starts crying upon seeing the protagonist and takes the opportunity to apologize to him. Gray definitely wasn't expecting that, but the boy, along with the others, regret what happened. He says that they are all orphans who were adopted by the church, but after the city went to war, the church ran out of funds, and that's why they had to take that job. However, he states that they only did it because they had no other choice, and out of respect for the knight, they asked for forgiveness. The boy also says that in the end, the Silver Knight was the only one who truly helped them, and because of that, he promises that when they grow up, he and the others will become great knights too, just like the Silver Moon Knight. Seeing that these children are determined, Gray asks if they are really serious about it. They say yes, and that they want to become knights. Since that's the case, Gray says they don't need to wait until they're adults and that they can start right now. They can even start forming a knight order. The protagonist then says he will go with them to the church and pay their commissions as knights. Speaking of which, they ask who is the one in armor on the horse. Gray says it's just a boy he adopted this morning, and his name is Jimmy. Shortly after, they arrive at the church, and the priest asks the reason for their visit. Gray responds that he wants to turn these children into junior knights and wants the priest to be a witness. In turn, the priest agrees but thinks it's just some kind of joke. He says Gray can enter, but since someone is praying at the moment, he will have to wait. Upon entering, the protagonist thinks that this is his first time in a church, and he also thinks it's the first time he's seen someone praying. However, he ends up being recognized, because Catherine introduces herself and says it's a pleasure to finally meet the Silver Moon Knight. However, Gray has a bad feeling about it. Inside the church, the protagonist recites the values of the knights, and before him, he makes the boys recite their oaths. And so they do, promising to honor the commitment. The boys promise to be loyal to Gray, and that all of his enemies will be their enemies too, and that anyone who challenges them will also be their enemy. In turn, Gray, as a knight, accepts their loyalty by the means presented. Soon, he grants them the sacred title and swears that as long as they keep their promises, he will protect them with his life. Inside the church, the children shout that from today onwards, they are knights. But Gray tells them not to get too excited because they are still novices. He also says he will bring them armor and horses, and then they will begin their training. Besides that, he says they need to think of a name for their order. Gray sees the boys' excitement and says that from now on, they should call him Captain. The protagonist becomes thoughtful about the path he chose for himself, but affirms that he will not regret becoming a knight, because ever since he was made official, it has been great. In turn, Catherine thinks that even if this is a deliberate way of trying to hide, there's no way it could be wrong, and that's the feeling of an angel. After that, Gray wonders if Catherine is there to kill him, but the angel says no because Gray hasn't broken any laws and hasn't killed anyone, and she says she's just curious about him and wants to have a chat. The protagonist asks what she wants to talk about. Catherine asks what the reason is for him wanting to be a knight. Gray says he finds it incredible to be a knight, because all the legends and the respect people have for knights are admirable, and there's nothing quite like it. With that, Catherine asks if he shouldn't be ashamed of being a good-hearted lich. She also says that the knight's path isn't that easy. After pointing out several details, she asks if Gray still wants to continue as a knight. The protagonist sees no harm in being a knight. Besides, he thinks Irene is a great lady, who doesn't even question him, and says that Catherine should meet her. While going to his horse, the priest calls out to the protagonist and is happy that he didn't leave yet, because he wants to talk to him about something. Before the protagonist leaves, the priest thanks him, because he says that he was a great help with the children. After all, the children are now interested in reading the holy scriptures of their own free will, and the priest's admiration for the protagonist is only second to that for the Holy Spirit itself. He also says that a knight like Gray should be recognized by the divine order. Then Gray asks if the priest will help him enter the divine order of the cross. The priest says that unfortunately the rest of the church has left the city. Since preparations for war have started in the White City, they left the priest behind to take care of the children. He states that he can't handle everything on his own, so he asks the protagonist for help in raising funds for the church, because a knight shouldn't leave children helpless. Gray then says he will take care of it immediately and runs straight to a tavern. The scene shifts to Jimmy after the walk. Dora sees him completely worn out and asks if he is okay. She notices that her master is even paler than usual and asks what happened. Jimmy gives a summary of how his day went and describes from his point of view how horrible it was to go through everything with the knight. However, Dora, as always, finds it all very funny. After all, Jimmy tends to dramatize simple events, but seeing her laughing at his suffering, Jimmy starts to cry. Dora then hugs him and tells him not to be sad. By the way, Dora says that if the master is that debilitated, he should let her send a request to the king to release his troops. Jimmy disagrees and says he would not be able to sit on a throne by force. Instead, he prefers to wait for the resurrection of the pureblood race. He also says that today's storm served to strengthen his ambitions for conquest, and now nothing can stop him from becoming a true monarch. After some time in the tavern, the protagonist joins a gambling table and gives no chance to his opponents, winning a lot of money for the church. But before going to the priest, a drunk approaches him in the middle of the street, saying that the protagonist made him lose all his salary, and now he wants at least some coins. Gray asks how much he needs. The drunk says at least 100 silver coins. Then Gray agrees, confusing the man. After that, the protagonist tells the man not to lose the coins again, but says he can't give him the rest because he needs to take it to the church. Some boys see the knight's good deed and decide to take advantage of it, so they approach, claiming they also need money. Throughout the way, Gray listens to sad stories, and with each person that approaches, he donates a bit of money. This makes him think that it's not just the pastor who needs money, but many others too, so he concludes he needs to get even more next time. In the end, Gray is left with only 2 silver coins, but that's what he has to donate to the church. As soon as he arrives, the boy says they have already thought of a name for their order. It will be the Super Invincible Order of the Silver Moon, and they even worked all night on the banner. So Gray says that's amazing and wants to start their training right away to turn them into knights and future defenders of the city. Speaking of which, the boy asks if Gray's adopted son won't be joining them today. The protagonist says he completely forgot, but will go fetch little Jimmy right away. Speaking of him, Jimmy is lying in his bed when Dora approaches. She asks what the problem is this time. Jimmy says that on Monday, he was dragged into the sun and had to learn how to ride a horse. On Tuesday, he learned fencing under the hot sun, but the horse was worse than he was. After that, he had to study night tales, dance, and do cleaning, and he blames it all on Gray. Dora feels a huge urge to laugh, but holds it in. Then Jimmy says he can't wait any longer because he will be tortured to death if he does nothing. Therefore, he tells Dora to talk to the king and act immediately. She reminds him that Jimmy had previously told her not to act hastily, but her master says the situation has changed, so they must act immediately. Dora understands and says she will take care of it. And like a bat, she flies off to the king. Sometime later, a soldier from Irene appears with an urgent report, saying that King Baird VI has sent a letter to all his subjects, and the lords who received the letters gathered their troops and are heading toward the capital of Lion. The princess says that the king is determined to go to war, as he is forming a defensive line. However, this didn't bring the peace of mind Jimmy had hoped for, because Gray put him back into training, which made Jimmy think he would die soon. Dora then says she can talk to the king again. Shortly after, the messenger appears with more news saying that the king is sending his army straight to the capital, and the meeting point is at the Duchess of Becker's border. Even so, Jimmy continues to be treated in a way completely opposite to what he expected. Soon, news about the king arrives again, saying that he sent troops to the swamps during the rainy season. Then the princess gathers the counts and asks their opinion about it. Felder in turn says that the king might just be confused, which would explain why he is making such nonsensical decisions. Speaking of the king, he is marching with his troops and leading them to their destination. However, he encounters Dora, who urges the king to march faster. He says he is going at full speed, and even if he reaches the White City in that condition, they won't be able to fight because everyone will be too exhausted. Dora asks if he truly desires immortality. The king understands what she means, so he says he will find a way to go faster. Thus, Dora returns to her master. On the other side of the upcoming battle, Princess Irene prepares for the fight. Abby Roberts says that the warriors have been summoned, and she says she will join them soon. Immediately after, she goes up to the top of the castle, precisely so she can speak to everyone. After all, an army has gathered to receive her orders. Irene tells everyone that the Heartless King intends to invade these lands through despicable means. The day of the battle is approaching, and she tells everyone to trust in their swords, because only then will they be able to protect their homes and uphold the glory that always shines from the House of Becker. Horace, for a moment, looks to the side, and sees that among the warriors, a group of children in armor are watching the speech. Then he asks why there are children in the battalion. Mike, one of his soldiers, approaches, saying that these children were enlisted by the Silver Moon Knight. One of the boys confirms the story, and says they are members of the Super Invincible Order of the Silver Moon. Seeing this, Horace is shocked, and as soon as the speech ends, he summons the leader of this order for a meeting with the princess. The boys are confused about what is happening. Even Irene is surprised by it, and asks if Gray really recruited these children into his order. He says yes, and affirms that these boys have potential. Horace then asks if Gray truly intends to take children into battle without their parents' consent, until one of the boys says they are actually orphans, and the priest who took them in is in agreement. Such information takes the princess by surprise, but the boy insists that they are committed to becoming knights and will give their all for it. Irene says she is happy about that. However, she asks to speak with their leader alone for a moment. Then the boys leave and tell Gray they will meet on the battlefield. Immediately after, the princess orders Gray to take the children back to the church, and says she will send someone to take care of them. The protagonist doesn't understand why, and says they are members of his order. The princess says that maybe in the future these children will become great knights, but it is precisely for that reason she cannot let them participate in this war, because if they get hurt, they will lose that future. Gray says they wouldn't get hurt as long as they had their leader nearby. Irene then asks if Gray even knows what a war is, or if he has ever been on a battlefield. The protagonist says yes, and affirms that the battlefield is where knights build their merit. The battlefield is a pit of extreme fervor. It is the meeting point of life and death, where swords and shadows cross, where knights born in poverty make their name, a place where all knights seeking merit and glory thrive, like sacred ground. At least that was what the protagonist used to believe, because after being scolded by the princess, he went to hide in the stables, since Irene got upset and told him to find a place to reflect on his actions, and since the cat was still asleep, he wanted some company. Tanitos notices that Gray really upset the princess, but wants to understand what he did to cause it. The protagonist says he didn't do anything pleasant and doesn't even like to remember it. On that occasion, Irene asked if merit and fame were the only things he cared about. She also said that if he wanted to build a career or seek glory, she wouldn't stop him, but she told him not to drag the children along. Because on the battlefield, there is bloodshed and victories are built on piles of corpses. Thus, the reason for fighting is precisely to ensure a future for the children. Not taking that away from them, Gray still tried to argue, claiming that even though they were children, they had potential, and he insisted that he could protect them in the war. The princess asked how he would do that. She also said that he could handle 100 men, but in war, he would have to face more than 10,000 enemy soldiers. Soon, in the blink of an eye, he would easily lose any of those boys, who could be trampled or suffer something even worse. In that way, not only would Gray become vulnerable, but he would also have their blood on his hand. Even so, the protagonist said that death was not a terrible thing, and that there was no need to fear it, because even if they died, he could bring them back. After hearing that, Irene demanded that he explain the meaning of his words properly, and that's how the princess dismissed him and ordered Gray to reflect on his actions. Now Tanitos understands why she got so angry. Then the horse asks Gray if he knows the meaning of being alive. He answers that he does not. Seeing that the protagonist has no idea, Tanitos explains a bit about the concept of life, especially from a human perspective. However, since Gray is an undead, he cannot fully comprehend it. Thus, Tanitos says he should go to a tavern and use magic to taste some food, as that would be a way to experience a bit of life. Gray calls Tanitos a genius and thinks it's an excellent idea, so he says that from today onwards he wants to experience what it's like to be alive. Tanitos says that learning that is the first step to becoming a great knight. But when he gets close to the tavern he usually visits, he sees the drunkard from before. The man's wife is begging him not to go back to gambling because that is all the money their family has. She says her husband is up to his neck in debt and begs him not to gamble again. But her husband says that she doesn't understand things the way he does and claims he will fix the situation, and if she doesn't let him go, he will hit her. Until Gray approaches and tells the old drunk not to hurt his wife. The drunk recognizes him from before and even blames him, saying that because of the money Gray gave him, he got addicted to gambling and lost everything. He also says that any consequences he suffers because of his debts will be the knight's fault. Gray then says he will give him money to pay his debts if he promises not to hurt his wife, but the wife herself tells Gray not to do it. She claims that her husband had his fingers collected the last time he gambled and is afraid something even worse will happen this time. The man tells her to shut up, claiming that his wife doesn't know anything, and tells the knight to just give him the money. Gray says he only has 2 silver coins left, and he didn't have time to go to the church, but says the man can take them. However, the drunk is not satisfied with the amount. Gray insists that this is all the money he has, but the man says that's a lie after all. Everyone in the city knows that Gray is a baron, so a noble like him should have a lot of money on him. He also says that his fingers were cut off because of Gray, and that a knight like him should have more honor and be honest. The man's wife tries to restrain him, but that only makes him even angrier. In the midst of all this, the protagonist wonders what he is doing, because this is not what is written in the books, and things weren't supposed to be like this. Back at the princess's headquarters, amidst the preparations for war, a messenger brings urgent news, saying that King Baird VI's army has left the Great Snowy Mountains, and they are heading toward the territory of the Duchy of Becker. The princess says that the day has finally come, and she will give an overview of the current situation as the king is currently beyond the Great River west of the White City after half a month of forced marching. They brought 40,000 troops under his direct command against her 20,000 troops, but the king might end up mobilizing more troops, totaling 100,000. This is a gigantic imbalance of strength between them, and if they let the king cross the Great River to the west, they will have no chance to defend themselves. That said, Gregory states that waging a war is not just a matter of numbers and believes they still have a chance, even with a smaller army. He also says that to win a battle, 3 main elements are needed: timing, location, and manpower. The king has been marching for 15 days, his soldiers are tired, and it's the rainy season, so if they delay 2 more days, the western river will rise. With that advantage, Gregory imagines that the riverbanks will make the soldiers suffer more, so they must not let the enemy gain ground. After saying that, the princess admires Gregory even more, and says that there is nothing that intimidates him. She also says that before the alarm sounded, she sent people to occupy the high ground on both sides of the western river, and all they have to do now is destroy the boats before the king can organize himself. Irene says that this is the best time to attack and capture the king alive, thus winning the battle. She also says that tonight none of the counts will sleep, as she wants their company on the battlefield. Felder agrees and says that now they really do need to stay united. Thus they all head together to the battlefield. Amidst this, Robert says that after the alarm sounded, Gray didn't show up at the barracks, and asks if someone should be sent to look for him. Irene says that Gray has some things to think about right now, and if he wants, he will appear voluntarily on the battlefield. Abby Roberts says there is one more thing. He says that Shelley woke up and asked him to inform the princess in private that the child named Jimmy has knowledge of dark magic to manipulate people's hearts and is likely not human. Thus, if that is true, this is no longer just a war between humans. The scene cuts to the tavern. The atmosphere inside is anything but pleasant. Everyone knows the alarm has already sounded and wonders why Gray is there and not on the battlefield. Meanwhile, Gray is sad and thoughtful, until something hits his helmet. Then he looks up, and realizes that his cat has finally woken up. The cat approaches and says he just took a nap, and when he woke up, a war was happening. First of all, the cat tells Gray to forget about the crazy drunkard because giving him money only made things worse. Gray says he only wanted to fulfill his vows and help the needy, and doesn't understand why things turned out like this. The cat can only think about how naive Gray is like a child. Then he says that the human world is very complicated, but he will teach him a few things. He shows a woman being bothered and says that by his oath, Gray would have to help her, but if he does, he might end up ruining her means of work. The cat also shows a musician and says that he was humiliated by some troublemakers, but if he is helped, he might never have the chance to sing in the tavern again. Then he asks if Gray really wants that. Gray answers no, but also says he doesn't know what to do. His cat says he doesn't know either, since he wasn't a good person in life, and says that's why there are so few good knights in the world. He also says that everyone treats a knight's oath as empty promises, and Gray might be the only one in the world who takes it literally. From above, Catherine watches Gray and thinks that if one day he fails to earn the respect of others, and even the princess starts to question her decision. Being a knight will not make him happy. Instead, it will only make him confused and miserable. Now that the war is about to begin, the angel wonders what choice the little lich will make. Sometime later, some soldiers on the battlefield hear the sound of a horse approaching, until they see galloping toward them the Silver Moon Knight, who arrives asking where Irene is, claiming he has something important for her. One of the soldiers says she is on the hill by the riverbank. Without thinking twice, the knight heads toward her, leaving the soldiers extremely confused by his sudden appearance. And it's also the first time they see the Silver Moon Knight riding a horse that isn't Tonito's. Shortly after, a soldier announces the knight's arrival. Irene is still upset and thinks he wouldn't miss the chance to boost his reputation. Even so, she agrees to see him and asks the knight what he has to report. The knight remains silent. Then Irene says that if he has nothing to say, he can warm up his muscles after crossing the river. But the knight shows his true intention. He is not there to talk. He is there to attempt to take Irene's life. The princess is greatly surprised by this. The knight takes her as a hostage and says that to save her, her soldiers must burn all the boats, so they will have no way to cross the river and will have to fight defensively. Angry and wounded, Irene realizes she made a mistake. Sarcastically, the knight says that the princess doesn't seem happy at all about this, and he says it was a terrible idea to keep someone in the army whose face was unknown, especially someone who could easily get close. Abby Roberts appears and says that the boats have already been burned, and now he demands that the enemy release the princess. The enemy says he will do so, because if she dies, the war would end, and that's not what His Majesty wants. So he releases the princess, and then jumps off the cliff. Roberts orders the soldiers not to let him escape. After that, he goes to the princess, saying he won't let anything happen to her. Irene says she was only superficially wounded and will be fine, but orders him to find the real Gray. Speaking of him, the protagonist has just left the tavern. He apologizes to Tanitos because he tried to kindly make him understand living beings, but says it only made him even more confused. Gray asks what living beings do when they are confused. The cat says they usually sleep. The protagonist says that liches don't sleep and he doesn't even know how to do it, so the cat says he needs to figure it out. Suddenly, several soldiers appear and find Gray wandering the streets, but they mistake him for the enemy, and now they want retaliation, believing he was the one who attacked the princess. Gray claims that this is a misunderstanding, that he would never attack Irene, but the soldiers tell him to save his explanations for later, as they are taking him to prison. It didn't take long for Gray to be taken away. He was locked up in a cell until the cat appears and says he found out why Gray was arrested. He says that someone impersonated him and attacked the princess, besides forcing his men to burn the ships, causing panic among everyone. The protagonist gets angry at the impostor and says he needs to get out of there as soon as possible to fix the situation. But right after, Irene arrives and says that he doesn't need to leave to explain himself. She then tells Gray to explain everything right now. Gray is happy to see that she is fine and claims that he is the real Gray, not an impostor. The princess asks if he has any way to prove it. Gray immediately suggests a dance. The cat calls him an idiot and says what they want is for Gray to remove his helmet. But Gray says it's not necessary because he knows the princess recognized him. The cat says that makes no sense. But to his surprise, Irene opens the cell. Gray asks where the impostor is because he wants to catch him and make him pay for what he did. Irene says there's no need for that. She says that Shelley woke up but needs care, so she tells Gray to stay at the castle and take care of her, and also keep an eye on Felder and little Jimmy, because they are under house arrest and need to be watched. Gray imagined he would be fighting, but the princess says he will be of great help if he does what she said. After all, everyone already knows what happened, and even knowing it was an impostor, they can't tell who is really under the armor. Even the people know about it, and since he never removed his helmet, they don't know his face and therefore can't recognize the real Gray. Fear has taken over everyone, and for his own safety, Irene says he should stay at the castle. Gray tries to argue, saying that a true knight does not let his leader go to the battlefield alone. Angry, Irene says she doesn't need his knightly vows, because that won't help her win the battle, and chivalry without victory is useless. She then orders him to stay at the castle until the battle is over. Thus, Gray agrees to stay out of it. He returns to the castle and sees the guards in battle formation outside. While lost in thought, Shelley appears, surprising Gray since they haven't seen each other in a while. Shelley says she heard a summary of the recent events, but she still doesn't know why Irene left her greatest knight out of the battle. Gray says the princess doesn't believe he can bring victory, because he tried to fulfill his vows, but her trust in him is shaken. He also says that everyone he tried to help ended up being harmed and that his actions don't always turn out as expected. He was upset because Irene said that chivalry without victory means nothing, and he doesn't understand why she thinks that way. Shelley realizes that a lot has happened while she was away, but she says that in any case, Gray helped her and her family, and for that, she is grateful. Gray is happy to be recognized, and he says he feels better after hearing her say that. He also asks if Shelley could help him with other questions. Shelley says she's not very good at that. After all, she doesn't understand much about philosophy. But she says that if he has a dilemma in his heart, he can visit the church. After all, the priest is a professional at answering questions and solving problems. Outside, someone throws a hook tied to a rope. However, he misses the top of the tower and fails to use the rope to climb. One of the guards hears something and asks his friend if he heard it too. The friend says no, but thinks it's better to patrol again. After all, it's a critical moment. We see that the one who threw the rope is actually the church's priest, but he has no experience with it, which is why he missed. And now he thinks he should have retreated with the others when he was warned about the war, until Gray appears and startles him. The protagonist asks why the priest is trying to leave the city, but the priest returns the question, asking why the Silver Moon Knight is chasing him. Gray says he is a little confused and needs to hear some advice. Having his escape attempt frustrated, the priest decides to return to the church. Far from there, on the battlefield, a messenger appears saying that the king's men have now started crossing the river 10 kilometers from the camp. Although many ships were sunk, they managed to avoid the enemy patrols. Now they are trying to bring knights and supplies ashore using militias. Irene realizes that the king truly has no intention of retreating, so she says they can't let him land. But right after, another messenger reports that he saw the king's army in the north as well, and that Felder's men along with Casper's have gathered around the king. The princess says that Felder himself is under house arrest, so she asks how that's possible. She ordered Gray to keep an eye on him and on little Jimmy. Then she asks what they are using to communicate and send troops to do that. After that, Count Gregory advises Irene to retreat to the White City for now, because at least they could defend the city since the enemies are grouping up. The princess says that the White City is isolated and retreating now would leave them cornered and the people would suffer, so she tells Gregory to stay there with the troops. She herself will head northeast to try to prevent the king from landing, because if she manages to capture Baird VI, she will still have a chance to win. Back to the protagonist, he managed to get a conversation with the priest and asks for advice to become a better knight, because now he's lost and doesn't know what to believe anymore, since he swore to protect the princess, but she herself ordered him to stay out of the battle. This conflicts with his knight's oath, and now Gray wants to know if he should obey his princess or strictly follow his knightly vow. The priest says that Gray is trying to be a knight and wants everyone to see him as one, but the problem lies there because there's nothing in this world that pleases everyone. He also says it's normal to feel confused, but that's because Gray hasn't yet seen the truth, and by truth, the priest means the heart of the knight himself. Gray doesn't exactly understand what that means, but the priest says that the heart is what matters because it's common to hear from others what is black and what is white, but the world is actually gray. It's hard to answer questions like that, but the answer is quite simple. Just follow and obey what your heart commands. The priest also says that when someone tells you what to do, in the end, it's still the person themselves who judges, and even if you don't always do the right thing will eventually show itself, just as not everyone can benefit from help, but there will always be someone who shows gratitude. In short, the priest says he should not treat what others say as law, but only as guidance, and that he should trust his own intuition. He also says that faith is a light that can illuminate the darkness around and show the right path. Thus, when someone fervently believes in chivalry and obeys their heart, right and wrong become actions themselves, and will demonstrate the best interpretation of chivalry. In the end, the priest doesn't even know if the knight understood his words, because judging by Gray's reaction, he looks even more confused than when he entered the church. Anyway, the priest knows that the city could be attacked at any moment, and if he doesn't leave now, it could be his end. And he says he feels better after hearing her say that. He also asks if Shelley could help him with other questions. Shelley says she's not very good at that after all. She doesn't understand much about philosophy. But she says that if he has a dilemma in his heart, he can visit the church. After all, the priest is a professional at answering questions and solving problems. The priest asks what the question is. Gray says that if a person dies and becomes an undead, but still can sing and dance and do whatever they want, what would be the difference between that person and a living? The priest says that question is even more philosophical than the others. But before answering, he would like to ask a rhetorical question. He asks if someone is evil and has stolen many times, is that person good or bad? Gray answers that he would be a bad guy, but the priest suggests that the person targets only the rich, especially the cruel ones, and distributes the loot to the poor. In that case, the protagonist says that Guy would be a good person, and the priest says it's the same with the dead and the living. What matters is each one's heart. It doesn't matter the origin or the methods as long as the intention is good. The living and the dead are no different. The protagonist says he understands, but going back to earlier, he asks if the priest was trying to flee the city. The change of subject catches the priest by surprise, but answering, he says yes, because he knows the city will be attacked and he doesn't want to stay to see it. He says he is following his heart and in the end chose to flee from danger, because he believes the princess herself won't survive until dawn. Gray holds on to that last statement and says that he must immediately go meet Irene, because he has a vow of loyalty to her and he needs to protect her. The priest asks if Gray could take him along as well. The protagonist asks if he is going to fight too, but the priest says no, he just doesn't want to have to climb the walls again to escape. As soon as Gray leaves the church, he meets the boys. His apprentices raise the group's flag, and one of them says he heard everything and knows that their leader is going after the princess. Soon they ask to go along, because they also want to help the princess and the city. The priest tells them not to do that and tells everyone to return to their beds. For his part, Gray says that after talking with the priest, he came to a conclusion. He says that if he dies, he will never return, and he's not sure if he can guarantee their safety in battle. But the boy says that he and the others risked their lives the day they swore loyalty to Gray. He also says that they are not children who need protection, but knights who can fight. The protagonist even gets emotional hearing that, and says he agrees with them. Then he gathers with the boys and says that together they will help the princess win this war. The priest asks if Gray is really going to do that. Gray says yes, and takes full responsibility. However, some soldiers pass nearby, and one of them spots the Silver Moon Knight. With that, he says he found the traitor and orders the others to arrest him. Gray doesn't understand why and says there must have been another misunderstanding, but the soldier says to say his explanations for his brothers who have already died, and attacks him. The protagonist defends himself and says that they always attack first and ask questions later. He immediately demands that the soldier tell him what happened to make them want to kill him again. Annoyed, the soldier asks how Gray can say that. because he says it was Gray himself who killed the dungeon guards with his own hands and freed Felder and his son from prison. Thus, the protagonist realizes that the impostor is acting in his name again, and he becomes furious about it, determined to stop the one who is tarnishing his name. He thinks that if he doesn't settle this matter before going to the princess, it will cause trouble later. So he says that pretending to be him must be a lot of fun, but now it's time to get really angry. Meanwhile, during the prison break, the impostor receives the news that someone is after them. Then he asks how many there are, and the soldier says it's just one, but it's the real Silver Moon Knight. Jimmy, who is in the carriage, becomes desperate upon hearing this news, and says they must get rid of the knight as quickly as possible, otherwise he will never stop. The leader of the group says they are at the meeting point, and tells everyone to prepare to capture this Silver Moon Knight. Gray wonders why they are slowing down, until he finally meets the impostor, and says that he has finally found the one pretending to be him, the same one who tried to assassinate the princess and killed the warriors of White City. Then he asks for the name of this individual. The impostor realizes that the protagonist's oppressive aura is very strong and wonders if this is the true strength of the Silver Moon Knight. He then says he heard that the Silver Moon Knight defeated 50 heavily armed knights with his own strength. He removes his helmet and throws it to the ground, and says that such martial feats can indeed be considered unparalleled in the world. But he asks what the knight could do if he had to face 4 times as many elite heavily armed warriors. The impostor says he has no name, but claims to be the captain of the first unit of the King's Shadow Guards, also known as Shadow. With that, the cat says that the King's Shadow Guards are ready and asks what Gray is going to do. For his part, the protagonist says he's going to charge head-on. The cat says he has evolved from a brainless idiot into a determined idiot. Gray says he just wants to crush them all, and tells Tanitos to launch a surprise attack. On the other side, Shadow orders the spearmen to get into position, and the wall of enemy soldiers aligns. Tanitos says that this formation is unpleasant, and he used to avoid it in the past, but now he doesn't care about that. As they approach, one of the soldiers uses a lasso, trying to capture the Silver Moon Knight, but it doesn't work, because the protagonist's strength ends up dragging the soldier far away. Shadow sees the protagonist advancing and says he looks like a hurricane. Tanitos, for his part, says he has spotted the impostor. The enemy captain says that relying only on his horse is a big mistake. However, when he tries to attack the protagonist, he is the one who gets hit, and right after, Captain Shadow falls to the ground. He says it was a terrifying punch. Even though he is equipped with high-quality armor, his internal organs feel shattered. With that, he witnesses with his own eyes the true power of the Silver Moon Knight. After his defeat, Shadow says he has failed and now wishes for death. Gray says he doesn't kill people and only wants the enemy to apologize to Irene and the warriors of White City. Shadow says that this is a war and apologizing makes no sense. Right after, Jimmy gets out of the carriage, irritated, and says he's tired of this, calling everyone a bunch of losers. He says he has reached the limit of his patience, and everyone is going to die. Felder is the first. He says that his master promised him immortality, but Jimmy shows no mercy to him or the others. Even the impostor has his life essence drained. The protagonist's cat gets super scared and wonders where this power is coming from. Gray says that this is dark magic, which steals life directly. Jimmy says that the knight doesn't seem surprised after all. He is immune to his magic eye. He also says that from the beginning, everyone thought the king wanted to annex the Duchy of Becker, but he reveals that in fact it was he himself who was responsible for it, as he is a descendant of Dracula, and now wants to claim what is rightfully his. And he states that he will send both the knight and his lady to the afterlife. A flashback shows that once, under the moonlight, little Jimmy was reading a book of Dracula tales, and was fascinated, stating that surely his ancestors were true members of the blood clans, until Dora appeared, and asked how long he intended to stay outside before returning home. Jimmy said he hadn't run away from home. He was just preparing to take over a magnificent castle like his ancestors did, and then conquer the world. Dora asked if he didn't already live in a castle, but Jimmy replied that he didn't want to live in a castle built on a cliff with nothing around. Instead, he would prefer a big castle with lots of servants. Upon hearing that, Dora asked where his master intended to go to get such a castle. Jimmy said he planned to go to the human world and intended to disguise himself as a noble's son, then kill the rightful heirs and take their castle. Back to the present, Jimmy says that his target is the Duke of Becker because he wants to take everything that belongs to him. He threatens Gray and says that he and his princess will both be sent to the afterlife, and asks if he will still cling to that stupid knight's code. After attacking, the protagonist's cat tells him to hide, and soon after, Jimmy's attack causes a huge explosion. He says that's what Gray deserves, claiming that's what happens to anyone who messes with him. He also says it's a pity no one is there to witness the iconic death of the great Silver Moon Knight. The protagonist's cat survived the attack, and seeing the situation, asks if Gray is okay. The knight's armor was destroyed in the attack, but the inside remained firm and strong, and now Gray doesn't need to hide anymore. After that, he sees the numerous bodies around him, but he uses his magic on them, precisely to turn them into undead. With that, he asks if there really is no one there to witness what's happening. Seeing this with his own eyes, Jimmy is shocked and asks why there's a lich in front of him. Far away, dawn breaks, and an army is ready. However, on the princess's side, things are not looking good. She can barely stand and asks how many soldiers are still standing on their side. Horace says that the cavalry was wiped out and less than 2,000 infantry remain at the last camp, and if they retreat any further, they will have to return to the White City. Irene is left not knowing what to do until Count Gregory appears and asks where the Silver Moon Knight is. The princess says she ordered Gray to stay at the castle. Gregory says that Gray has immense strategic value and she shouldn't have left someone so strong out of the battle. However, Irene says that doesn't matter now because the king has an army of 100,000 advancing, and with that he will manage to win. So Gregory says that if the princess has already given up, he no longer needs to stay as a companion, and he can't lead his family to ruin with the princess. Thus he states that as soon as the king massacres the White City, he will choose to surrender to him. The princess says that they are going through hard times, but she won't stop him. In the city, rumors about the war spread and people are already losing hope, and even plan ways to flee the city. Even Shelley wants to leave the city to meet her grandfather, but the guards try to protect her from the dangers outside. Shelley asks where Gray is since the princess ordered him to stay at the castle to protect her. Thus, they shouldn't need to leave if he is with them. The soldiers apologize, but say that the Silver Moon Knight left the city and is not with them. They saw with their own eyes that the knight left before dawn with a group of children, and they have not received any news since, so they assumed he fled. However, Shelley doesn't believe this theory. She says she knows Gray well enough and affirms that he is not someone who would flee from battle. Near the river, a large movement approaches, scaring the animals that live there. The king's army is arriving, and an argument between him and the archbishop occurs because the archbishop doesn't like seeing so many losses. The king says that the outcome of this war will depend on the archbishop's testimony and will bring victory fairly, so he asks him to pass this to the Holy Order. With that, the archbishop hopes that the end of this war will indeed be fair and righteous. Back to the princess, she can no longer bear wearing her armor and prefers to continue fighting without it. Irene says that at least they are still there, her remaining forces. On the other side, the king's army of 100,000 is about to end everything. But before attacking, he tries to convince Irene to surrender and save the lives of those who still remain. He promises that in the name of the kingdom of Isaac, if Irene renounces her right to inherit the throne of House Becker, he will forgive her. Irene thinks that the darkness of breaking oaths, the corruption of faith, and the greed of the heart have become an eternal shadow over the entire world, and says that the king's word means nothing to her. However, the king states that his words are trustworthy. The princess finds it very funny to hear that, because she remembers the vow the king made years ago with the Becker family, promising that the crown would guarantee the rights of the first heir of House Becker. But now he is doing exactly the opposite. The king counters, saying that she is not the first heir of her family, but her brother is. Irene asks if she really has a brother. Considering the king's reputation and his poor decisions, she thinks even that could be a lie. However, the king said she has no choice, and he will not break his vow in front of tens of thousands of people. Then, Irene orders everyone to lower their weapons and follow what the king says. The soldiers don't want to do it and don't understand why the princess is about to surrender. Even Horace questions her, claiming that even if they lose, they will fight for her until the end. Irene says that would be negligence, and she doesn't want more people to die for her. However, she hasn't given up. She just doesn't want the others to continue. Horace gets irritated with this decision, but the princess calms him down and says that this is her final decision. She speaks directly to Horace and to Abby Roberts, her loyal squires, along with her uncle Gregory and his family, claiming that this is her last order as princess, ordering everyone to drop their weapons and get as far away as possible. Even though they don't want to do it, they end up obeying the princess. After all, she is still their leader. Irene says that they are all released from their obligations to her and her family. She thinks it's actually good that Gray isn't there, because with all his skill, it will be easy for the survivors to find a new lord. Irene stands up and says she will continue fighting until her last breath. Then alone, she heads out to face the king and his entire army. The king calls her a foolish girl, but says that if she wants to end it this way, he will fulfill her wish. With that, he orders his soldiers to get ready. However, he starts to hear a voice approaching, shouting loudly, humility, integrity, compassion, sacrifice, valor, and justice. Even Irene recognizes this voice and realizes that Gray decided to show up, thinking that there are still those who defy the law to uphold their vows. Gray, with his army of undead, says that for glory and for his conviction, he swore loyalty to the princess and the Becker family. Therefore, all who rise against her will also be his enemies. Thus he will fight for her honor until death. From there he charges forward, ready to face the enemy army. From above, Catherine watches everything and feels pleased, and says that when all humans forsook their vows, a small light still remained lit. She also says that this night has finally reached his climax, and wonders what will be the end of this small hope. Before that, near the city walls, the children hear a lot of noise coming from the other side, and wonder why Gray is taking so long to return. But they know that their leader is strong, and nothing bad can happen to him. Meanwhile, the priest thinks that after being taken outside the city, Gray went alone to pursue the impostor, so the children wouldn't follow him into battle, until suddenly some soldiers appear, and the priest asks why there are knights in the forest. He sees that by their clothes, they are neither knights of the city nor of the king's army. Seeing that they were surrounded by unknown soldiers, the priest prepares to protect the children. However, one of the boys notices that there is no danger, and says that these soldiers are there to protect them, because the crest on their clothes looks like the crest of the silver moon, so they must be with the boss. The priest wonders where Gray found so many people, until the protagonist himself appears, and says that he's back. He also brought armor and war horses, and asks if the boys are ready. The priest asks if he's really going to take them to war. Gray says yes, because as he promised, he will take them to the battlefield and fulfill his vow. Because a knight never breaks a vow. Back at the battle, the king finds this resistance ridiculous and asks what a few knights can do against him. He then orders his golden armored knights to attack. From the top of the white city walls, the soldiers spotted the Silver Moon Knight and say they are saved because he is fighting the king. Gray says that no one will leave this place until the king apologizes to Princess Irene. For his part, the king orders his men to kill everyone attacking him. Catherine watches everything and asks her teacher if the little lich can win. Professor Abbott says that even though he is stronger than a human, it is impossible to defeat 100,000 men, because his magic will run out long before he gets close to winning. The angel says that Gray knows his opponent is strong, yet he is trying his best to fight him. She also says that he is either very young or very ignorant, but either way, his courage is admirable. The protagonist Kat says that Gray should have brought the army of undead, not those children, and calls him crazy. Gray says that he had a revelation from the Holy Spirit and affirms that something holy doesn't need an army of undead to participate in this war. However, the cat doesn't believe it and says that he just didn't bring the undead because they were unstable, and asks if Gray really thinks he can win against 100,000 soldiers. The protagonist says he doesn't know, but even so, he won't give up. One of the boys says that his horse is trotting more than it did during training, and he doesn't know if he can endure. Gray simply tells him to believe it himself, because they are all Silver Moon Knights now, and the Holy Spirit will bless them. In a brief moment, even the angel is surprised, because from the heavens, a power descends blessing Gray and his troop. The blessing covers them completely, and makes them stronger and more confident. One of the boys says he feels so strong that his whole body responds to the power. On the other hand, the Archbishop wonders how this is possible, and affirms that such power can only be used by a true paladin. Catherine observes Gray and says that even knowing he's not invincible, he still keeps fighting. The strength of Gray's troop is such that it not only intimidates the enemies, but also strikes them directly. The enemy troops become vulnerable to attacks and are getting trampled. The protagonist's cat gets super scared and says that Gray is going to end up killing everyone with that fire. But Gray says that it's not fire, it's the ascension of the Holy Spirit. Even if Gray doesn't care about his own integrity, the cat reminds him that Tanidos is also undead, and this power could kill them both. But Tanidos himself says he will fight with the sacred light. The cat wonders why, among all these people, he is the only one with a bit of sanity. On the other side, the king cannot believe what he sees, and asks why there is a paladin under Irene's command, until he is startled by people shouting from the walls. The old drunk is cheering for Gray to win, saying that he can't die before paying the coins he owes. Shelley is also cheering for him, telling Gray to use his magic to blow up the enemies. Several people climb the walls to cheer for the Silver Moon Knight, and the guards can't stop them. Even the priest sees this and is surprised that Gray used the true sacred magic of the Holy Spirit. Even the princess's remaining soldiers are cheering, claiming that this is a miracle. However, Catherine's teacher says that this is not a miracle but stupidity, because that lich will turn to ashes by being in contact with sacred magic. But the angel says that's what they teach humans, because only the righteous side is supposed to be able to use sacred magic. She also says that when evil takes over the land, there will be heroes covered in holy light who will come to save the world with the will of the Holy Spirit. Abbott asks what Catherine means by that, but ignoring him, the angel approaches Gray, saying she's going to help him in the battle. After that, Catherine uses her powers to further strengthen the knight and his mount. Not only that, but she does the same with the rest of the troop. Gray asks if the Holy Spirit is recognizing him. Catherine says no, but says that an angel has approved him, Thus, a very strong light is emitted over them, visible from afar. Even the Archbishop sees that Gray was blessed by a guardian angel. Now the knight is advancing with a miracle, used by the will of the Holy Spirit. That is enough for him to say that this war is being fought unjustly, and he thinks he's not on the right side. Meanwhile, the king gets scared. Then he tells the other soldiers not to stand still, because even if the knight is a paladin, they are still at war. The Archbishop tries to convince the king not to do this, because now he believes that the king is being influenced by the forces of darkness and should not continue the war. Angry, the king tells him to shut up, and says that no one can speak like that to the king, attacking the Archbishop right after. Catherine draws Gray's attention to it, and he immediately understands what he must do. So he charges forward and stops the Archbishop from being struck. The king doesn't like being interrupted, but Gray only cares about saving the Archbishop and getting him away from danger. Soon the Archbishop tells everyone that the king has been corrupted by evil, and in the name of the Holy Spirit, he summons all the members of the army to end this unjust war. With that, the king finds himself facing the soldiers' weapons and doesn't like it at all, saying that the enemy is on the other side and they shouldn't be aiming at him. The Archbishop calls upon all the soldiers in the name of the Holy Spirit to arrest the king, and to put an end once and for all to this unjust war. The soldiers are divided because on one side there is the Archbishop, the leader of the church, and on the other side there is the highest political leader of the country. King Harperbeard of the Kingdom of Isaac, in his youth, was known for his bravery. He led a great army and defeated the invaders from the Kingdom of Alan under absolute disadvantage. It was the battle that made him famous. After that battle, he became the hero of the Kingdom of Isaac, and countless young people joined his army and became part of the Golden Armor Knights, precisely to follow his martial example. But there is an end to every hero's legacy. The Archbishop reinforces his order, stating that everyone must lay down their arms and stop the war. However, the soldiers claim that they have an oath of loyalty to the king. Nevertheless, the Archbishop asserts that the oath did not include the practice of injustice, and if they look ahead, they will see the holy light, paladins, and angels. That should be more than enough for them to understand whom they are fighting against, because by continuing the war, they would be blaspheming the Holy Spirit itself. On the other side, the priest says that if the enemies continue fighting, he will fight too. He says that those knights on the battlefield dressed in holy light are fighting bravely, but under their armor, they are just children of 12 or 13 years old. Thus he states that if even children can defend their homeland and the Holy Spirit, then adults should not be afraid. The people around are surprised by such information, but they end up agreeing with the priest's statements and want to fight for their city too. Seeing such commotion among the population, the soldiers begin to realize, and they perceive that they are fighting on the wrong side, until one of them asks the king for forgiveness and says that he can no longer fight for him. Even respecting the vows they made to each other, he cannot continue fighting in a war against the Holy Spirit itself. After all, their vows are not greater than that. With these words, the other soldiers also lay down their weapons and surrender. The king is furious and asks if mere words from his opponents are enough to sway the loyalty of his soldiers. After that, the leader of the soldiers asks the Holy Spirit for forgiveness, saying he did not inform the church when he discovered that the king had ties to the vampire clan. Upon this revelation, the king becomes furious and calls him insane. But shortly after, another soldier says that it is not insanity, because he also saw the king interacting with a vampire who appeared to be a silver-haired girl. He also says that if he is lying, he will die and go to hell along with his family, and will never again be blessed by the Holy Spirit. If what was said before was not enough to convince the other soldiers, such a revelation came like a punch to the gut. For his part, the king falls into despair, because his own army turned against him, and no one obeys him anymore, only staring at him with judging eyes. Harperbeard says that he is always right and his words are law. Therefore, nothing on earth should rise against him. However, his act of desperation does not prevent him from being subdued by his own soldiers. On the other side, Gray asks if he won. His cat says that by a miracle, yes, and now he is the greatest knight in the entire Kingdom of Isaac, and maybe in the whole world. Then Gray takes a good look around, and realizes that while he is under the protection of an angel, the others on the battlefield admire his greatness as a knight, and even surrounded by enemy soldiers, Gray is seen as victorious. Even his princess admires him. Gray approaches Irene and apologizes to her, claiming that he didn't protect her as he should have, and also arrived late to the battlefield. Irene is even momentarily speechless when speaking to him, which scares Gray. After all, he was expecting to be reprimanded. However, Irene says that he arrived at the perfect time and secured victory for everyone. With that, the entire princess's army celebrates the victory. Not only them, but the population too. On the wall, Shelley watches everything and says that this was a magnificent knight's tale about a resilient princess and the great knight who finally reached a perfect ending. During the Battle of White City, which took place in the territory of the Kingdom of Isaac, the knight named Gray appeared for the first time in human history, and defeated the army of 100,000 heavily armed men of the king, a miracle in military history of mankind. After the battle, King Baird VI was dethroned and awaits a verdict from the Pope. Some nobles from the Duchy of Becker, who were in collusion with him, were also duly detained. With full support from the Holy Council, the sole noble heir of House Becker, Irene Berbera Becker, officially inherited her father's title and became Grand Duchess of the Duchy of Becker. As for Gray, he received a new title, becoming the second count in the new Duchy of Becker, alongside Count Gregory. In just a few months, he was promoted from commoner to count by his own merit, and his deeds spread across the entire continent. He was treated as a model for other knights, becoming an ideal that all young aspiring knights wanted to follow. In the same year, Archbishop Anthony I.E., who was 80 years old, went to the Holy Council to report the causes and consequences of the Battle of White City. Shortly afterward, the council officially recognized Gray as the fifth paladin of the entire continent. The others had been trained by the Pope himself, making Gray an exception. However, Gray was not summoned, which caused some strangeness. While a great struggle for the throne was taking place in the Lion's capital, which had lost its king, Baird VI had 12 children, and the fight for the throne set the heirs against each other. Regardless of all that, none of these events seem to have greatly affected the current White City, because with the current reputation of the city, no one dares to attack them. All thanks to the Silver Moon Knight and Miss Irene, now Grand Duchess. However, no one has seen her since the succession ceremony, and people wonder what she is doing. For his part, Viscount Horace spent 5 days and 5 nights tallying war damages and compensating the families of the dead. Meanwhile, Abbey Roberts spent 7 days dealing with the stagnation of commerce and the diplomatic situation during the war. Irene spent 9 consecutive days managing the territory's governance after the war, having to handle all kinds of tasks. Amid all this, Horace asks why she didn't call Gray to help. The Duchess says that Gray is not capable of handling paperwork and already helps a lot by not getting into trouble. Right after that, a messenger appears, saying that the Silver Moon Knight sold the castle he had won to Count Gregory, and is now throwing gold from the tower of White City's castle. The Duchess is incredulous upon hearing this, and everyone is amazed by her reaction. However, Irene knows it is typical of Gray to do something like that. Even so, she asks if Gray is still at the castle, because she wants to talk to him. Meanwhile, in the Kingdom of Heaven, Catherine walks alongside her teacher, for both were summoned to a meeting, convened by the Holy Spirit himself, who heard that Catherine helped a lich in the midst of a war. Catherine says that the decision was hers alone, and had nothing to do with her teacher Abbot, and that she had to act immediately, because otherwise the little lich would eventually have been destroyed because of his faith. Upon hearing that, the Holy Spirit finds the statement interesting. The angel says that the lich is devoted to the Holy Spirit and is willing to sacrifice everything for it. Although ignorant, such commitment is rare, which is why she decided to help him. Then the Holy Spirit asks if Catherine is sure of her choice, and says she should know that the life of a lich is as long as that of celestial beings. Catherine says she is certain of her decisions and swears by her angelic powers that she thought carefully before acting. Back in White City, snow falls and honors the name of the place. The people who had been busy all year finally have a moment of peace and leisure, including a certain paladin who takes the opportunity to have fun in the snow. The cat asks the protagonist why he is so excited. Gray says that it never snowed in the underworld and he had only heard about it in books, and now that he can finally experience snow, he is fulfilling a dream. His cat says that now he is a paladin and shouldn't be rolling around on the ground all day. The protagonist hesitates, remembering that it was the cat himself who once said that if he rolled on the ground, humans would serve him at his will. Hearing that, the cat says it's different because he is an animal and Gray is a paladin, and even if a knight rolls on the ground, people won't serve him. However, shortly after, several people appear to give gifts and food to Gray, shattering the cat's theory. This only makes the protagonist believe even more that his thesis was correct. Meanwhile, the cat increasingly thinks that Gray's foolishness is irritating. He quickly tells the protagonist not to use a cat as a model for behavior. But when moving around furiously, the cat scatters snow, and Gray deduces that he wants to play a snowball war, until he bumps into someone and apologizes, but he is surprised to see that it's Shelley. Then he asks if the girl also wants to play in the snow. Shelley refuses and says that actually, she would like to talk to him about something personal, and invites him to walk a little. Realizing that she is feeling cold, Gray says that Shelley needs a blanket, and lends her one that he had just received from a kind lady. After that, Shelley says she heard that Gray sold his castle to her grandfather, and says that Irene granted him the Hamlet port fief some time ago. Gray asks if that's true. His cat says yes, and asks if he doesn't remember. A flashback shows what happened when Gray sold the castle. The cat gets furious with him, but the protagonist claims he didn't need the place, so he sold it. While he was handing out gold to the people, the Duchess arrived to speak with him. Irene immediately asks if it's true that Gray sold the castle he had won. Realizing she is angry, the protagonist hesitates a little but ends up telling the truth. She asks if Gray did that because he needed money. The protagonist replies no, but says that his knights and many people in the city needed it. So he thought it would be useless to keep the castle anyway and found this a viable solution. Irene says that she compensated the families of the dead but ignored the city's productive situation and praises Gray for having thought of it for her. She says she couldn't ask her subordinates to sell their fiefs to help the economic situation, but she thanks Gray for having done so. She also says she will take care of the matter and moreover will reward him by relocating Gray to another fief. Hearing that, the protagonist says that Irene is a wonderful master and runs to hug her, but due to his size and strength, he almost knocks Irene out. Thus, he is scolded by the others for almost knocking down his own master. For her part, Irene says she is fine, as she didn't die, just bumped her head on the armor. By the way, she takes the opportunity to ask Gray about his future plans, since he may not realize it, but he is one of the 5 paladins in the world. And with that, he has the right to get involved in major events throughout the kingdom. But the protagonist says he won't leave his master. He says he doesn't know much, but he is sure of one thing and affirms that he is Irene's knight, and because he made a vow to her, he will always follow her. Upon hearing that, Irene admires him even more and feels sorry for having suggested that he leave. And since her knight said that, she will also keep her vow, stating that no matter what Gray is or was, from the moment he swore loyalty to her, he became a knight, and Irene promises to uphold his position and ensure that he is never wronged. Back to the present, Gray says that's what happened, and Shelley praises him. Then she says she wants to ask a direct question and hopes he won't be offended. Soon, Shelley asks if he is planning to become part of the Becker family. The protagonist doesn't understand what she means and asks if Shelley is referring to another knightly title or something like that. The protagonist's naivety is so great that it draws the attention even of a young girl like Shelley. However, the protagonist's cat, as always, gets irritated. He says that this conversation is heading into dangerous territory and tries to interrupt, and Gray asks why. The cat says he'll explain later, and for now tells him to simply say that he will not join the Becker family but will always serve as a knight, and tells Gray to repeat exactly what he says from now on. After that, Shelley understands that Gray has no relationship with Irene, but to her, that means that Gray is available to become part of her family. The protagonist confirms it, but the cat says he wasn't supposed to say that, as they had an agreement. For her part, Shelley says that Gray answered very directly and understands that it was just a joke from him, so she says she won't bother him with that subject anymore. Before leaving home to meet the protagonist, Shelley's grandfather initially believed that Gray was just an associate of the Holy Order, and it never crossed his mind that he was actually a paladin. Then he asked if Shelley knew what that meant. She was unsure at the time, but her grandfather said that Gray had no last name, which meant he didn't belong to any family. Gregory then said that Gray could thus become part of his family, and said that Shelley knew what needed to be done. Back to the present, she says she received orders to invite Gray on a blind date, though only Gray believes that, as his cat remains very suspicious of her. In any case, she says that Gray doesn't need to be so formal, since they are just going shopping and eating something. The protagonist says that even though he didn't understand anything, he is always available to accompany her. Shelley asks if Gray is really free, because she doesn't want to interfere if he has received a task from Irene. Gray says that his lady told him that his job was to patrol the streets of White City and help those in need, so Shelley feels more relieved. Then the two of them go out through the city. Shelley takes Gray for a stroll. During that, they end up visiting some clothing stores and some tourist spots in the city, until at the end of the tour, they go to a candy shop. There, Shelley chooses a dessert called Forest Volcano Sundae, saying that this is the shop's specialty. But seeing that Gray isn't eating, she asks if everything is okay. Gray replies that he just doesn't know where to start, but deep down, he thinks that he needs to develop magic to eat things as fast as possible. In the midst of that, someone approaches. The woman asks if the girl in front of her is Shelley, granddaughter of Gregory. Shelley gives a polite smile, but deep down she thinks that trouble is coming. She knows that this woman is the eldest daughter of Duke Fernandez, named Eliza Clara Fernandez. Shelley says it's a coincidence to meet her there and asks when Eliza arrived in the city. She replies it was when Irene succeeded to the throne. Eliza says that Shelley shouldn't behave like a child, as walking alone in the streets doing nothing is not fitting behavior for someone like her. But Shelley says that she is not alone, since she has a knight accompanying her. With that, Eliza says that Shelley is now 16 years old and should behave accordingly, taking care with her words and actions so as not to shame her family. After that, she says she'll leave them to enjoy their meal and goes away. Shelley feels relieved that the troublemaker left and says that conversation was killing her inside. The protagonist asks who that person was and why she made Shelley so nervous. Shelley simply says that Eliza is kind of like a cousin to her, Because of the marriage relationship, the Gregory and Fernandez families have a close bond. Thus, it's correct to say that the girls grew up together. They even played together as children and had a good relationship. Once, Eliza took Shelley to a secret base, but Shelley didn't want to enter because she thought it was dangerous. However, Eliza convinced her to explore the place, saying it would be fun. However, the closeness between them eventually came to an end. Shelley approached Eliza when she saw her wearing a beautiful dress, but Eliza said it wasn't her choice. She didn't understand why she had to wear a thicker, heavier dress just because she was getting older. Not only that, but her behavior also had to be aligned with etiquette standards, so Shelley asked why she didn't behave as she wished. Eliza claimed she had no choice and felt frustrated for not being able to be the same person she was before, because adults said that only through rigorous etiquette training could ladies display their family's education and dignity. And all of that was part of a girl's inner preparation. From then on, Eliza became a full aristocratic girl, always appearing beautiful, elegant, and charming at the balls, like a beautiful and fragile ornament, something that Shelley found boring, and she wondered if she would become like that too, becoming a symbol of prestige for the family and eventually marrying a man she never knew for the sake of the family's reputation. That kind of archetype really was never interesting to Shelley, but while she was thinking about it, a certain night appeared in her life. After the outing, Gray took her home and asked if she would like company up to the door, but she said no, besides knowing that Gray needed to return to the castle. Then he says goodbye and leaves. Shelley can only think about how amazing Gray is, because there is always something unusual about him. She would like to know more, but she thinks she cannot bother him with her personal problems. Back at Irene's castle, a messenger appears with an urgent report from the lion's capital. Irene asks what the problem is. The messenger says that the turmoil in the royal capital has ended, and Prince Benedict I has finally taken the throne. He issued a royal decree inviting Duchess Becker, Count Gregory, and Paladin Gray to attend his coronation ceremony. Shortly after, Gray receives the invitation and asks what the lion's capital is. The cat responds that it's the capital of the kingdom of Isaac and says that something big is about to happen. Meanwhile, Gregory asks why he was also invited. Shelley says that he is an important ally of Irene, so that must be the reason, and she bets that the new king definitely has a plan for his relationship with Irene. Speaking of Irene, she says that even though it's a banquet, she must go to the meeting, but tells her men not to lower their guard and to prepare for the journey. Shortly after, at dusk, in the middle of the forest, a cave serves as a refuge, until someone approaches and by stepping on a branch, announces their arrival. Dora, Jimmy's loyal squire, says to her master that someone is coming. However, the protagonist without his knight's armor approaches and tells them not to be nervous. Jimmy asks what he is doing there. Dora protects her master and says she won't let anyone touch him, but the protagonist says he is not there to cause harm, and only came to deliver something to the two of them. Jimmy sees that it is a set of armor and asks what Gray intends with that. The protagonist asks if he remembers when he killed an entire human army in the forest. Jimmy says yes. Then Gray says that his guardian angel told him that Jimmy's actions are a violation of the agreement between the Holy Spirit and the vampire clan, which gives the angel the right to obliterate the little vampire. But Gray says he granted forgiveness using his privilege as a paladin on the condition that Jimmy becomes his follower and all his sins will be redeemed. So Jimmy asks if Gray is trying to show them mercy. Gray responds that it's not that, and says that if a lich can become a paladin, then vampires should be eligible too. And anyway, they are now part of his Silver Moon Order, so they should pack their things and travel with him to the capital. Jimmy says that this is disgraceful, and it would be better if Gray killed them both right there. Shortly after, the great new Duchess of Becker sets out on a journey to the lion's capital, accompanied by her loyal paladin. In the middle of this journey, they are caught by a fog. One of Irene's men says it's dangerous to travel in this mist, and suggests that they rest in a village ahead. Thus, Irene agrees, but Gray has another thought. The cat asks what the problem is, because he has noticed Gray distracted for some time. Gray says he has a strange feeling about this mist. His cat says it's only because he has never seen anything like it in the underworld, and there's nothing unusual about it. However, while riding near a cliff, Gray almost falls off the edge because he couldn't see the danger due to the fog. He asks if Tanitos is okay. The horse says yes, and Gray asks why he didn't say anything. Anyway, Gray hears some voices calling for him. Then he realizes it's Irene. The protagonist starts shouting, revealing his location. Soon the person looking for him finds him, and upon approaching says for Gray not to go anywhere, because it's quite bad to have to search for him alone. Gray wonders since when Irene changed her armor, and that's not the only strange thing, because right after, Irene draws her sword and attacks him. Gray doesn't understand what's happening. Then Irene says that he still hasn't understood the situation, and tells him that she no longer needs him, and tells him to disappear. The protagonist asks why she is behaving this way out of nowhere. until the cat says that she's trying to kill him and tells Gray to fight back. He also says that the war for the duchy is over and Irene no longer needs him. Besides that, Gray is now one of the only 5 paladins in the world. Thus, wherever he goes, people will pay more attention to him than to the Duchess, so she probably doesn't want that. He deduces that Irene must hold resentment against Gray and waited for the right moment to get rid of him. However, the protagonist doesn't believe what the cat says and claims that Irene isn't like that. The cat insists that Gray must fight or else he will die. The protagonist refuses, claiming that he made a vow to Irene and cannot hurt her. Irene laughs and asks if he really takes those vows seriously. She draws her sword and calls him an imbecile, striking him immediately afterward. Seeing this, the cat says they are doomed now. With the strike, Gray's helmet comes off, and now his true face is exposed. Irene says it is a great irony that the paladin ordained by the Holy Spirit is actually an undead. Now she has even more reason to finish him off. Not only her, but the soldiers also attack, because now Gray has become a declared enemy of the Duchess, and all his armor is destroyed. Now that the protagonist is exposed, he takes a blow to the arm and has his limb torn off, which is something Gray wasn't expecting. Irene says that an undead is even more fragile than she thought. Furious, the cat insists that Gray fight back, claiming that he will end up dead if he doesn't react. But nothing convinces the protagonist to fight against Irene. She thanks him for that, saying that if he respects his vows so much, he should obey her until the end, therefore ordering him to return to hell. The protagonist tries to talk and asks if his master really intends to kill him. Irene asks if he is afraid of death. Gray says that if she really wants to do this, then he will not resist. However, his cat gets extremely worried and does not want that to happen. For his part, Gray says that if Irene really wants to kill him, she should accept him right through her body, because the quicker the embers fade, the quicker he will completely disappear. Irene gets irritated by this, because she thinks Gray is bluffing. She says she has the courage to kill him if necessary, but Gray says he doesn't believe it. After all, under the Treaty of the Gray Vestments, she cannot do anything to him without permission. So he says that if she won't do anything, then he will. Gray places his hand on his chest and says that he doesn't care who or what it is, but he will not allow this creature before him to insult his lady again, and says never to try to enter his consciousness again, after which he rips the life essence from his body. Then the creature disguised as Irene realizes that it has failed in its plan. Shortly afterward, the protagonist wakes up and realizes that he is next to the real Irene. She says she is frightened by Gray and asks what happened to him, because she saw him completely still and he wasn't reacting even when called. The protagonist brushes it off and says it was nothing, and also notices that the mist has already dissipated, but Irene asks what he's talking about. She says that Gray must have fallen asleep on his horse and had a dream because she saw no mist at all, and says that if he is tired, there's a village up ahead where they will camp. Gray wonders what really happened. Nearby, the ones responsible for the illusion appear. A demon named Zelda says she can't believe Tarvia was burned by the soul embers of a little lich. Anyway, Zelda says that the little lich is bolder than they expected. Tarvia says she can't understand where humans got a lich to fight alongside them. Zelda asks if they should expose the lich to the humans. Tarvia says that's the worst way and says the Demon King is trying to give those old geezers in heaven a hard time. She also says that if they could capture that paladin and reveal his identity at the perfect moment, it would be ideal. More than that, Zelda says that the guardian angel is returning, so Tarvia says they need to leave. Zelda says it's just a class 2 angel, and he can kill her with one hand. Tarvia says that if he wants to break the pact between heaven and the abyss, he can go ahead. Soon Zelda says that she's right and agrees to leave immediately. Some time later, already in the village, the protagonist sees his guardian angel approaching and asks why she's back. Catherine says she brings good and bad news and asks which one Gray wants to hear first. Then Gray says he wants to hear the good news. The angel says that the good news is that the Holy Spirit has approved her as Gray's guardian angel. She also says that now Gray is officially recognized by the Holy Spirit as a paladin. Gray celebrates, but the angel says now comes the bad news and says that he cannot reveal his identity because if he is exposed and subdued by the human race, the angels will immediately disassociate from him. Catherine apologizes, but says that's the farthest she could go for him. The protagonist gets a little confused and asks if that's all. Catherine notices Gray's naivety, but says that as long as he is not exposed, he can do whatever he wants. So the protagonist thanks the angel for her work, and Catherine calls him an optimistic and innocent child. Before leaving, Catherine notices something strange, and asks why there is a strong demonic odor on Gray. In the Lion's capital, in the kingdom of Isaac, Irene's cavalry approaches, and people admire her and the paladin as they like having one nearby. Some say that when they grow up, they want to be paladins too, and even believe that the people of Allen will be very jealous. The protagonist, seeing this, says that although he expected it to happen someday, he didn't imagine it would be so soon. Before that, his guardian angel warned him about the encounter with a demon. Gray asks if Catherine is referring to that mist he encountered earlier. He also said to Catherine not to worry, because he drove the creature away, which by the way wasn't even that strong. With that, Catherine says he must know that there is a non-interference pact between angels, demons, and liches, which demons call the Grey Robe Accord. Due to this agreement, the demons will not use force against Grey. Instead, they will try to distort his faith, because many paladins were corrupted by them before Grey. The protagonist says he will not be corrupted, no matter what temptation comes. Catherine says she believes him, and advises him to be careful, because his next opponent could be any human. She says that Grey already knows about the demons, so they will no longer initiate direct contact with him. Instead, they will pretend to be humans to try to deceive him. Grey asks how he will tell them apart. The angel says that it is difficult. Unlike paladins, demonic associates have no magical powers, so they don't look different from normal humans, and she can only tell him to be careful with any suspicious person who approaches. Back to the present, the new king of Isaac, Lord Sharp Benedict, says that the paladin has finally arrived, and along with him, Duchess Irene Baker and her men also arrive, saluting the king. Sharp Benedict says he is not yet king and will be crowned in a few days. The crown is still with the bishop. Irene asks if that is why His Majesty asked the paladin to witness his coronation ceremony. Answering, Sharp Benedict says yes. He also says that Grey, being a paladin, should not need to perform such a grand salute. However, Irene says that Grey, besides being a paladin, is also a count of the Duchy of Becker, so he is still a subject and must bow. Hearing this, Sharp Benedict says that a county is very little for a paladin. Thus, Irene realizes she is being tested. Although she knew it was a ceremonial meeting, she didn't believe he would be so direct from the beginning. Even so, she decides to play along and says that the new king's statement makes sense. Thus, Sharp Benedict realizes that she is very good at reading the situation. After that, he tells everyone to rise, and announces that a welcome banquet for the kingdom's heroes is waiting for them. After entering, Grey says that it's very beautiful inside. His cat says that this is the king's palace. Then he says that the king asked if he is a count, and finds that question very strange. The cat says that the king has no problem with Grey being a count. He just thinks that Irene is not qualified to be his master. Grey disagrees and asks if the cat thinks Irene is a bad master, but the cat says he wouldn't know. After all, he's just a cat. Anyway, he says that Grey's attitude toward Irene is so obvious that even a blind person would notice it. Then Grey says it's more than obvious that the king is a demonic associate, and that's why he is somehow targeting Lady Irene, so he wants to take him down right now. However, he receives a call from his guardian angel, telling him not to do that. Grey asks if the king isn't associated with demons. Catherine says he needs to understand one thing. An associate is definitely a bad guy, but not every bad guy is an associate. The fact that she has to explain this makes Catherine think she's dealing with a child. She says that Grey has lived in human society for a long time and asks if he has never tried to understand the structure of human classes. She also says that he is now a paladin, and his actions represent the Sacred Order and the Holy Spirit. Meanwhile, Benedict I is the king, the ruler of this country, and he represents the kingdom of Isaac. Thus, if Grey makes a move against him, everyone would speculate whether it was a direct order from the Holy Spirit himself. If contested innocently, his action would mean that the Holy Spirit declared war on the nation. With that, the protagonist understands the gravity of the situation. Catherine says that even if the king really is an associate of demons, Grey could not take direct action against him. Grey asks why not. She says that just as he has his helmet, the demon's envoy has the mask of a king, so when he wears the mask, he is the king, and Grey can only apply holy justice when the mask is removed, revealing his true face to all. Then Grey says he understood and will rip the mask off his face, but Catherine says he understood nothing she said. Sometime later, while the ball is happening, Irene approaches the protagonist. Meanwhile, the people around comment that she is the first woman to become a Grand Duchess in the kingdom. Some comment that Grey's loyalty to her must be because they are lovers. Otherwise, there would be no reason for a paladin to voluntarily submit to a small duchy. For her part, Irene says that these comments are made on purpose, until the new king welcomes the arrival of the Becker Duchy delegation. Then he invites the Duchess of Becker to dance, and asks if she will grant him that honor. Irene says that Sharp is very kind, and leaves the protagonist to go dance with the new king. For his part, Grey wonders why he is being left aside again. His cat says it's normal not to always trust your lady, and tells Grey he must learn to defend himself. Then he says that he's been to a ball before, therefore he just needs a partner to dance, until he looks and sees Shelley. But before reaching her, another girl steps up to be his partner. But she's not the only one. Several young ladies appear and present themselves, even fighting among themselves, and nearly slapping each other to have Grey as a partner. Grey gets scared and asks what's wrong with them. The cat says he is popular with the girls. Before he realizes it, he is surrounded by them, and they all insist they want to dance with him, leaving the protagonist very confused, until he says loudly that he will only dance with Lady Shelley. Shelley herself hears Gray say this, but apparently doesn't like it very much. People wonder if Gray is talking about Gregory's granddaughter, who came to the party with the Becker delegation, and they question why the granddaughter of a mere count has the attention of the Silver Moon Knight. In the midst of all this, Gray invites her to dance in front of everyone. However, Shelley feels awkward, as all the other girls' attention turns against her. Gray notices her discomfort and says he just wanted to dance, but that doesn't stop Shelley from being extremely embarrassed by the invitation. Then Shelley quickly goes to Gray and pulls him to dance. Soon, the protagonist ends up moving away from the other girls and dances only with Shelley. She, as always, has his full attention, but instead of being guided, she ends up guiding him. Gray praises her guiding ability, but Shelley's disappointment is clear on her face. The king watches the dance and notices that the roles of man and woman were reversed and becomes confused. Irene tries to justify it, saying that Gray always likes to try new things. Speaking of which, Sharp asks if Gray wears armor all the time and if no one has ever seen his face. Irene says that at least she has never seen it. However, Sharp says that it doesn't matter because no matter how he appears, girls will be attracted to Gray. He asks if Irene agrees. She says she doesn't quite understand what His Majesty means. After that, Sharp Benedict says he wishes to speak with her privately. Alone, he says that he wishes to make a deal with Irene in exchange for Gray, because he claims that the Silver Moon Knight is exactly the type of subordinate he needs. However, he knows that Gray's loyalty is towards Irene, so he would like her to break her vows with him and make Gray swear loyalty only to the new king. Irene says that Sharp should know that this isn't something she can decide unilaterally. Sharp tells her not to refuse so quickly, because he still has something to say. He says that in exchange he offers a prosperous territory, and Irene could even keep her hold over all the lands she currently controls. This would not only double her existing territory, but would also surpass her father's achievements. Even so, Irene says she cannot decide that alone. Then Sharp Benedict tries to explain it another way, and tells Irene not to be a stubborn girl, because he claims that she won't want to keep that knight forever. After the king says that, Irene says she didn't quite understand what he meant. Sharp says that Irene shouldn't pretend to be confused when thinking about the difference between black and white, because a knight on a horse with an angel dressed in holy light facing an army of 100,000 men alone just to rescue the only girl in his heart. Such a story sounds very romantic, so he asks if Irene's heart wasn't touched, since everyone sees her with Gray and thinks of them as a couple. Yet Irene says she cannot give up her knight and wants to keep him for herself. Sharp says that Irene is his lady, and as the only one from House Becker, she cannot marry Gray, and as a paladin recognized by the Holy Council, he cannot marry Irene either, otherwise both their reputations would be compromised, and it would be fatal for the newly stabilized Duchy of Becker. But Sharp says they can still remain just master and servant. He says that Irene has a chance. After the Battle of White City, royal prestige has hit its lowest point. The kingdom of Alan has started to move, but many royal troops no longer obey the new king's orders. Irene says that if the kingdom of Alan invades, she will support the new king, but he says that a verbal promise means nothing, because he says his own father was known for making empty promises, and what he needs is a paladin with direct loyalty, especially one not born in the country. Sharp says that in an imaginary scenario where a paladin becomes a hero of the country in a battle against a foreign nation, the hero would return home and kneel to propose to the girl who was once out of reach. In that case, everyone would applaud and bless them. Thus he would have fame and status, and the girl would have the knight she loves, and the new king would have a strong reign, concluding with a victory for everyone. Back at the ball, the dance ends, and Shelley stops for a bit and rests. But when she looks around the hall, she realizes that everyone is still watching her, and concludes that without the king's consent, these reserved noble ladies wouldn't dare act so boldly. Shelley thinks that these people could not have come to the ball because of her. Thus, she concludes that she is stealing the attention that should be focused on Irene. Then Grace says that Shelley seems tired and asks if she is okay. She says she is, but asks why, among all the others, Gray chose her to dance. The protagonist says that she was the one who taught him how to dance, and he's afraid of dancing terribly with others. So Shelley tells him not to be afraid, and tells Gray to come closer because she wants to tell him something. Back to the new king, he says that Gregory is an old fox who united 7 families without bloodshed, and Irene should know very well that the reason he helped her was because he saw the connection between her knight and the church. As long as Gregory is alive, Irene will have trouble controlling the true power of the duchy. Sharp says it's easy to lose control and offers to help manage it. Meanwhile, Shelley tells Gray not to accept any dance invitations except from Irene, because this is a test from the king, who is trying to separate him from his master. The protagonist asks why he would do that. Shelley says that after the battle, the royal family's prestige weakened, while the clergy's prestige increased. To stabilize his regime, the king would certainly try to integrate the Pope. As a paladin who shone in the Battle of White City, gray is now the best symbol of the Holy Order. The religious reform initiated by the paladin in the Principality of Becker gave the Holy Council a taste of success, and now they will turn their attention to the entire kingdom of Isaac. The king says that to implement the reform throughout the kingdom, paladins are necessary, so that's what the Holy Council will do. Shelley says that if the Holy Council wants to increase religious influence in this country, they will probably ask Gray to distance himself from Irene and swear loyalty to the king. Gray says that he doesn't like the king because he might be an ally of the demons. However, his cat tells him not to say those things and not to involve ordinary people in dangerous matters. With that, Shelley says it's not about liking or disliking, because the Pope appointed Gray as a paladin, meaning he must follow the Holy Spirit's guidelines. Then she asks what Gray is going to do. The king tells Irene to think carefully about it, and says he knows she is a smart girl. Back to the protagonist, he asks his guardian angel if it is the will of the Holy Spirit that he leaves Irene. Catherine says that the Holy Spirit rarely gives specific orders. He prefers believers to think for themselves. Gray then understands that this is not what the Holy Spirit wants, but the angel says there is no doubt that the Pope is also doing this for the Holy Spirit. The protagonist says that the Holy Spirit also doesn't want him to break his vows, and besides, there are more important things now, because demons are among them. Catherine thinks that is true, because if there is anything more important than vows and loyalty, it is dealing with the demons among them. Sometime after the ball, in broad daylight, a demon arrives to speak with Zelda and Tarvia, and says it is rare for the two of them to ask for her help. Zelda asks if she is surprised, and Tarvia asks what makes her more suitable than them for this mission. The demon watches the angel from afar, and asks if even a second-class angel can stop them. Tarvia tells her to be careful not to engage with the angel, but the demon says that a mere second-class angel cannot stop her from doing what must be done. Meanwhile, Catherine feels something strange, and asks what that aura was just now. Inside the royal castle, Gregory goes to Irene's room, and tells her to open the door, because he has something urgent to say, so she appears and invites him in. Gregory asks why she is still wearing yesterday's dress. Then he realizes that the Duchess has not even slept. Irene tells him not to worry because she is fine, but now she wants to know what he has to say. Gregory says there was unusual troop movement in the Kingdom of Alan 4 days ago. The king ordered Duke Downers to send troops to the border, but Downers refused. To be honest, Gregory says this news is actually from 15 days ago, but it was blocked and only came to light 4 days ago. The royal family's prestige has dropped to historic lows, and now the king is desperately seeking support. He has been closely associating with the church recently and must be trying to win the support of the Holy Council, but the council does not interfere with internal national affairs. So Gregory fears that the king might target Gray or even Irene directly. She says his analysis makes sense because last night the king confronted her. Gregory is alarmed, realizing that the king has already made his move, and asks where Gray is. The Duchess says that the Archbishop invited Gray to a service at the church this morning. So Gregory says that the church has been in collusion with the king for a long time, and asks if Irene really feels comfortable letting Gray go to the church alone. She says not to worry because Gray did not go alone. At Pierce Cathedral, Gray arrives accompanied by Shelley. The protagonist is impressed with the place, and says it is much more spectacular than the church in White City. By the way, he says it's a great coincidence that Shelley was also invited to the church, but Shelley herself knows it was no coincidence at all. The night before, while she was sleeping, Irene came to her room and woke her up. The Duchess said she couldn't sleep, and had a favor to ask Shelley. After hearing the request, Shelley said she was once again about to take the blame for Irene. Even so, she agreed but thinks she will blackmail Irene for it at the right time. Then someone calls for Lord Paladin, and runs toward him. Dean, the priest from White City, asks if Gray remembers him. The protagonist says yes, and says he would not forget the one who enlightened him and taught him about the truth of his heart. Shelley asks what he's talking about, but the priest cuts the subject and says it was just a conversation they had in the past. Then he says that the Archbishop is waiting for the paladin at the cathedral, so the protagonist climbs the stairs and meets the Archbishop at the top, greeting him very politely. Soon, the Archbishop realizes that he is accompanied, but sees that it is not the Grand Duchess of Becker, because she was the one invited. Shelley introduces herself and says that Irene was feeling unwell last night, so she sent her as her spokesperson. One of the church members asks the Archbishop if Irene purposely decided not to show up, but the Archbishop calms the mood and says that as a spokesperson, Shelley can naturally speak on behalf of the Duchess of Becker. As soon as Gregory finds out that Shelley accompanied Gray, he becomes extremely irritated and asks why Irene pushed his granddaughter into the spotlight. She responds that the king wanted to use the emotional card to make her persuade Gray, and so did the church. Therefore, she had to make it clear that she would not interfere, and everything would depend on what Gray chose for himself. As for Shelley, she is a smart girl and will know how to handle it. However, Gregory says that it's not about being smart, because Irene is throwing his granddaughter into the fire, and besides, she's only 16 years old. Nevertheless, Irene says she thought that's what Gregory wanted, a relationship between Shelley and Gray, precisely to make him a member of his family. Therefore, if he wants such benefits, he must also accept the corresponding risks. Gregory says that either way it wouldn't work, because anyone can see that Gray is closer to Irene than to Shelley. Irene says that if she transferred Gray to the king because of her own personal feelings, the very act would be a betrayal of Gray and his oath, and she asks what right a selfish traitor would have to stand beside a paladin knight. Speaking of him, Gray greatly admires the beauty of the cathedral and imagines that the inside must be even more magnificent. He says that the runes on the walls are very beautiful, and he can even feel the magic coming from them. The Archbishop says that if Gray is interested in it, he can ask someone to show him around the entire cathedral later. Because the cathedral of the capital is not just for prayers and worship, it is also responsible for the entire diocese, so there are many clerics stationed there. For her part, Shelley says that naturally the standard here is superior to other places, and the Archbishop agrees. She also points out something, because a fresco painted there is quite striking. The Archbishop asks if she recognizes the painting. Shelley says that the painting refers to Abbot Sald, a holy man who was executed by a mob thousands of years ago, but she didn't expect to see it in a church. Such a story frightens the protagonist. For his part, the Archbishop says that Abbot Sald was a devout saint. He advocated a radical religious reform that offended both the nobility and the commoners of his time, and because of the situation, the Holy Council had no other choice and gave up protecting him, so for a certain period, even his name became taboo. Only after 100 years, when the matter was forgotten, that the Holy Council was able to restore his reputation, and the Pope included his deeds in the Church's history as a warning to future generations. This painting was commissioned by the then Pope, therefore it is authentic, and Shelley says it is ironic that the Holy Spirit abandoned protecting a devout man. The Archbishop says it is because the Holy Spirit favors the people of the world more than the devout. Shelley asks if the Holy Spirit prefers worldly people over saints who are giving their best. Then the Archbishop realizes that the girl is speaking sarcastically on purpose, and he deduces that today's conversation will not end well.
Our video ends here. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, bye bye.